Welcome to this meeting of the Maidenhead Development Management Committee on the 20th of March 2025. My name is Councillor Shah Martin and I will be chairing the meeting. This meeting is held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. We are not expecting the fire alarm to sound this evening. However, if it does, may I ask you to leave in an orderly fashion and rendezvous across the road outside of the library next to the fountain. Firstly, it would be useful if all voting members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in the meeting and the role they are undertaking. So if I could start by going to my left.
Good evening, my name is Louise Reid and my role is Deputy Head of Planning.
Good evening, my name is James Cross. I'm the Major Sites Team Leader at RBWM.
Good evening, my name is Nick Westlake. I'm a Principal Planning Officer.
Good evening, I'm Mohammed Salim, Principal Planning Officer.
Hello, good evening. I'm Councillor Jack Douglas, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Gary Reeves, member for Cox Green Ward and voting member of the panel.
Councillor Gurk Singh, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Leo Waters, representing Bray, a member of the panel.
Councillor Mandy Bra, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Jeff Hill, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Helen Taylor, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Kashmir Singh, voting member of the panel for Riverside.
Kim Woodley, Democratic Services Officer. I'll be clerking this meeting.
Thank you. I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking if appropriate. I will also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or to have the individual removed. I would also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a committee, I would please ask you to limit the repetition of points or questions which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We will now start on the agenda items. Firstly, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. And do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Singh?
Yeah, I just wanted to declare that I've carried out site visits and visited.
Is that the agenda item for Lawnfield or which site visit?
That's for all sites. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Taylor would like to say something.
I won't be taking part in the discussion and the vote on agenda item, which is going to be the last item, which at the moment is number 4, which is Kimbers Lane, because I actively campaigned against the development. So I will leave the room when that agenda item is being heard. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just to, for interest as I can't get my words out. Interest of transparency. In September last year, I had a briefing with Taylor Wimpey on the Phase 2 site on Harvest Hill. No opinions were given. It was just purely to show what they were looking to put in there. I come to the panel with an open mind and I have discussed this with legal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So moving on to the minutes, are we happy to acknowledge the minutes? And that's from the 13th and the 27th of February.
Councillor Waters as well.
Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I didn't campaign, but I see it very sure on item, the land south of Kimbers Lane.
I missed the first bit because your mic was off.
I did speak, I didn't campaign against Kimbers Lane development, but I did speak against it some years ago when it was coming out of them.
do you need to declare that you've come here with an open mind, or?
I come, yeah, I'm an
Yeah.
open mind now, because it was quite a long time ago, but better see, better be safe than sorry, that's why.
Thank you, councillor Waters.
Thanks.
So moving on to the minutes of the 13th and the 27th of February, are we happy to acknowledge those? Yeah, thank you. And due to councillor Hill's declaration of interest on the Kimber's Lane application, we are bringing forward Lawnfield House to be the first item. So could I hand over to Nick to do the presentation on that one? Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. This is a full planning application for the proposed construction of a residential care home C2 use class comprising of access, parking, landscaping, associated works following the demolition of the existing buildings on site. There are some case updates. There was an update sheet circulated earlier today. The first two items were on that update sheet. First one is that an additional planning condition is being added. This involves the removal of all permitted development rights for the development, meaning any alteration to the proposed building, including additional fenestration, would require planning permission. The second update is that the first floor flank stairwell window facing 3B Westmorland Road shall be fitted with an obscure glazing and non-opening. The third update, this is a verbal update, and that is that the seal figure in the report at 0.9272 is referred to as being £1 million. The actual figure is circa £430,000. And the final update is within the plans list. Condition 2 of the plans list should include the following plan, and that is a tree protection and removal plan, revision 1. It's referred to as revision 2 in the published agenda. So the structure of the report and presentation this evening is there's an overview of the proposal and the recommendation. Then I'll talk about the location and the setting. And then I'll be discussing the specific planning objections and then the conclusions and recommendations. There is no 5-year land supply and the tilted balance of the MPPF applies. This means that the development should be approved unless the harms arising significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme when taken against the policies of the MPPF as a whole, having particular regard to directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land and securing well-designed place. The host building is a non-designated heritage asset on an unallocated site. It requires a balanced judgment as instructed by the MPPF when involving the demolition of this building. This report has found in favour of the proposal, taking into consideration the significance of the heritage asset and the Conservation Officer comments. Concerns have been raised by the tree officer in respect of the loss of trees on site and the root protection areas of some of the remaining trees, all of which are TPO'd within the red line. These concerns can be addressed through the use of detailed planning conditions and via an arboricultural method statement planning condition. Third-party objections have been raised regarding the design, scale and height of the building. This has been assessed by officers and is deemed to be acceptable. Other third-party objections have raised the impact of amenity on third-party land, ecology issues, landscaping, lack of parking and drainage. All of these issues have been addressed through the design and also the use of planning conditions and the Section 106 legal obligation. Overall, officers have found The harms are not deemed to be significant or demonstrable in nature, and therefore planning permission is recommended to be approved. So the application is for the demolition of the existing non-designated heritage asset and its outbuildings. The proposal creates a 58-bed residential care home, C2 use class, all the rooms with ensuite wet rooms. This is the equivalent of 31 new residential dwellings according to the National Housing Delivery Test. Only those over the age of 65 shall be able to live there, or those suffering from dementia. The building is mostly 2.5 stories in height, and all the rooms are well in excess of the CQC room size standards. That's the Care Quality Commission. Open space and biodiversity net gain is found on site. Vehicle access and pedestrian access is achieved from Westmorland Road. New landscaping is also proposed together with retention of significant amounts of the existing landscaping. Moving on to the location and the setting. So the application site is within Maidenhead. It's some 800 metres west of the town centre. Bath Road, which is to the north of the site, is a main distributor road out of the town, approximately 1.2 miles from the A404 to the west. Bath Road is to the north, Westmorland Road is to the west, and Boydham Road is to the east. The Bath Road elevation is 60 metres in length, and the Westmorland Road elevation is 67.5 metres in length. It's an unusually large plot with 0.4 hectares in total site size. This is the constraints map. Internally, in the hatched area in green, the whole area has a blanket TPO cover, so all the trees on site are TPO'd. The building, as stated, is a non-designated heritage asset. It's within a groundwater protection zone, and it's entirely within flood zone 1. Externally, blue star, that indicates a 3-storey building in the locality. The red triangle indicates commercial buildings locally, including a garage immediately to the east. The green circles along Westmorland Road indicate tree protection orders of individual trees that's recently been applied to those trees on Westmorland Road. And all of the road network is adopted highway. There's a listed building to the north of the site, and there is a contaminated land site to the northwest, hatched in green and orange. Yellow and orange. So this is the building itself. This is the non-designated heritage asset. Image 1 shows the Bath Road elevation, the northern elevation. Image 2 shows the rear of the dwelling from the garden, the southern elevation. Image 3 is the Westmorland Road elevation, eastern elevation. And the aerial view is in image 4. As one can see, it's surrounded by mature trees, vegetation, and indeed fencing. In relation to the fencing around the site, Bath Road elevation shown before you, and that fencing is approximately 1.8 metres in height. This is taken fairly recently. As you can see, there are no views of the site due to the trees in situ. The Westmorland Road elevation, similarly, there is very few views of the site available. The only view available is given on image 3, and that is glimpses of the Westmorland elevation. So when considering the loss of the non-designated heritage asset, paragraph 216 of the NPPF requires a balanced judgment based on the significance of the non-designated heritage asset. It is a large plot size. That is unusual, but not considered specifically special by officers. It's surrounded by trees and other fences, and the committee report does indicate that there are other examples within the ward and many others within wider Maidenhead setting. There is a lack of a 5-year land supply, and it's considered the site is inefficient in use as at present. As I go on to, the expected demand for elderly population is prevalent. The elderly population are living longer. There's increasing numbers of dementia sufferers. And there's a closure of some substandard facilities within the borough. And there is a lack of the higher caliber, good and outstanding facilities. So there are 3 reports that have looked into the demand, 2 of which have been submitted by the applicant. First one being the Carterwood report, August 2024. This chiefly showed that in 2027, there would be a net need for 263 full market standard wet room ensuite care homes. This is in the local market catchment area, including the provision of 126 dedicated dementia care beds. Currently, there is only 45% of local supply have the ensuite wet rooms. The Frank Knight report, March 2024, found similar. The 2017, by 2027, there would be an undersupply of 169 beds when considering the wet room requirement as the higher caliber standard. This undersupply increases to 243 beds by 2032. 46% of people admitted to these residential care homes, according to Frank Knight, are submitted primarily due to dementia. RBWM produced a housing needs assessment in 2022, so just after and during COVID, and this reported an oversupply of nursing care homes and care beds, by 250. However, there were mitigating circumstances during that report, obviously that one being COVID. But that report also showed that 810 additional dementia sufferers would be living in the borough in 2035. So in terms of other reasons raised by objectors, the scale and height of the building is before you. The red image shows you the wire frame of the existing building. So the existing building has an eaves of some 5.8 metres and a ridge of 10.2. There are 2-storey flanks on this proposed dwelling building with hipped roofs. So the overall height of the building proposed isn't significantly taller than what is already there. The majority of the ridge is 10.6 to 11.4 metres in height, with a maximum ridge height of 12.6. That is larger in scale than some of the buildings locally, but as I indicated, there are 3-storey buildings on that Bath Road elevation, so this would join them. It's not considered that the overall scale is excessive given the wider settings of the neighbourhood building sites. In terms of appearance, the scheme uses a dark red brick, a red multi-brick, white render. There's a cream lime window surrounds, dark red clay tile roofs, dark blue, grey clay roof tiles, and white UPVC windows with black rainwater goods. There's plenty of articulation. There's rooms in the roof space, making this a genuine 2.5-storey high building. The green blocks on the flank elevations are biodiversity net gain green walls, softening the development. Again, this is an image. This shows you the view towards Boyden Road. That would be the red image. And there are some balconies present externally. These are some images of the building, CGI images, what it would look like. It shows you the footprint. So the red is, again, the existing footprint of the existing buildings, and the grey area shows you what's proposed. It has been reduced in size from 70 beds to 58 beds during the application process. The sustainability credentials are strong. It's fabric first approach, U values, reducing thermal bridgings, etc., happening throughout. There are air source heat pumps, PV panels and electric charging points on all the car places, 20% savings under Part L building regs, and a carbon offset of some £50,000. This image talks about the overlooking, overdominance and parking arrangements. The borough-wide design guide speaks of there needing to be a 30-metre distance when dealing with a 2-storey building and a block of flats above 2 stories, including ideally 3 metres of the first aspect of the garden space. So the nearest building is 36 metres away to the east, that is, and that is the Blue Star. And then it goes up progressively, 41 metres, 45 metres. To the south, Westmorland Road in the Black Star, that is some 30 metres away, but the viewing angle is more oblique, and that only of the rear garden space. Officers are mindful that there would be a loss of amenity to those residential properties, especially in the winter when the trees are not in leaf, but the distances involved. Officers have concluded that on balance that harm is acceptable. So this is the root protection area and tree loss plan. The green circles show the existing retained trees. The red denotes those trees to be removed. There are 34 trees identified on site and 8 groups of trees. No category A trees, 10 category Bs. The removal involves the removal of only 2 category B trees, 7 groups, and overall 25 trees are removed. The root protection areas have been assessed, looked into and refined, and officers are content that with a planning condition involving an arboriculturalist, if any works take place within 1 metre of these areas, their retention of the existing trees, both on site and on the road adjacent Westmorland Road, those protected lime trees would be retained safely. 5 new trees are proposed to be planted. So landscaping and ecology, all the trees on the Bath Road elevation are retained. Biodiversity net gain is achieved on site. There's no ecology objection. There is a sufficient retention of boundary trees and hedges supplemented with the new landscaping. Highways, there's been no objection from the highway officer, 19 car parking spaces. That's deemed sufficient given the expected local employees of this facility likely to walk or get to the place of work via sustainable means. Travel plan will be secured by the 106. This will include reducing car usage by 10%. There's a section 106 for bus stop improvements and local footpath improvements. So conclusion and recommendation, officers accept there are harms to this development, that being there is a loss of a non-designated heritage asset, the trees and the ecology harm, there's an impact on residential amenity, there is an increased scale of the building, and that would have an impact on the street scene, and there would be an increase in general disturbance. We're expecting in the peak hour 8 movements, overall daily 110. However, overall these harms are considered moderate to low in nature, not significant or severe, and that's weighed up against the benefits of there being 31 new residential dwellings, high quality care home being established. Officers consider there's a clear need for such accommodation, 20 to 25 jobs to be created. It's an efficient use of the plot in a sustainable location. There's a biodiversity net gain on site. The building is carbon efficient. There's an economic uplift during the construction phase. There will be a basement included in this development, I should hasten to add, but that's for staff purposes only. It's sill liable, and there are pedestrian and bus stop improvements via the section 106. So in conclusion, the recommendation is to support the development, and subject to the recommended planning conditions and the signed legal agreement, the application would adhere to the borough local plan policies. There is a lack of a 5-year land supply and the tilted balance applies. There are no adverse harms that have been identified that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the scheme as a whole. The recommendation is to approve the development as set out in section 1 of the report, subject to the signing of a legal agreement and the planning conditions listed in section 12 of the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Before I open this up to the floor, we're going to change things slightly differently in that sense, because we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. That we'll do all the speakers, and then when you've got questions of the officers, and then we'll go to a general debate after that, so we can speed things up a little bit. So the first speaker I'd like to call up is Mark Stockbridge, please.
signs confirm around the one stop which is to just confirm that.
Thank you, Mark. When you're ready, if you could press, is it the right button? I think it's on here. Yeah, right button. And when you're ready, you've got 3 minutes and you'll be warned when you've got 1 minute left. Thank you.
Submitted the 57 letters of objection, concerns which have been underrepresented in the planning officer's report. I was speaking to oppose the demolition of the historic Lawnfield house, its replacement with an oversized building that fundamentally alters the local amenity, breaking a significant number of your own planning guidelines and precedents in the process. This is clearly a 3-storey monolithic structure that dominates a third of the plot. Its ridge height of well over 12 metres is a 23% increase in the height of the existing property, while the eaves rise by a striking 45%. The plot dominance is starkly out of keeping with the residential character of Westmorland Road. The report omits various planning precedents. At 3 Westmorland Road, the initial proposal for a 7-property development was reduced to 3 to preserve the area's character, while a mere 2-storey extension at number 7 was refused for excessive infilling. Neither of these points were addressed in the report. Furthermore, Fig 6.2 of your borough-wide design guide explicitly shows developments of this scale that disrupt the rhythm of the street scene are not permissible, yet for whatever reason, the planning officer has chosen to disregard this guide. The proximity of the building to the south and east boundaries combined with intrusive window placements violates privacy guidelines. This is compounded by the removal of 34 of the TPO protected trees which form the green boundary, further degrading visual and environmental quality, with the trees critical in absorbing noise and pollution from the busy A4. The planning requirement to deliver biodiversity net gain, frankly, is implausible. Numerous species were documented in objection letters, and replacing mature trees and open green space with a car park and massive structure defies common sense as an ecological improvement. Frankly, it's an insult to our collective intelligence to suggest otherwise. We believe the planning officers grossly overestimated the potential benefits, placing undue reliance on developer-funded reports that lack true objectivity. It's alarming that these reports, have been referred to as scholarly, despite their inherent bias. We trust that you're better able to apply your professional scepticism and rely on independent analysis in making your conclusions. With annual fees of at least £82,000, which will be inaccessible to most local residents. We're concerned that once residents exhaust personal assets, the premium bill will fall to the council.
1
This is
minute
worrying
remaining.
given the council's recently requested £103 million bailout and 25% council tax increase. This has been raised in objections and ignored in the report. The report describes the property as being just over the 800 metres from the nearest station. However, it's in fact 22% over the threshold for poor accessibility. Precedents have been set within both neighbouring plots previously defined by you as poorly accessible. Yet again, these precedents are not cited. The provision of 19 spaces is therefore inadequate against your own guidelines, which require 34. This shortfall will add to parking from a nearby school, increasing risk of a serious accident on a residential road. At a similar application on Norris Drive, which is almost exactly the same walking distance from the station, the same highways officer has requested guidelines be upheld, another precedent disregarded. We urge you, as elected representatives of our community, to follow the planning precedents you have set and back your own planning guidelines by rejecting this application. Thank you very much.
Could I please call up the next speaker, David Lobb, please? When you're ready, you've got 3 minutes, so if you press the right button. Thank you.
I'm David Lobb. I'm Land and Planning Director for Boutique Care Homes. My role is to identify sites in towns where there's a proven need for new care homes, and then secure the sites, work through planning, and then work with my construction colleagues to deliver the care home. Boutique Care Homes is a small, privately owned care home business. We are award-winning, voted top 20 care home group in the last 2 years running, and we were voted in November 2023 the best small care home operator in the United Kingdom. We pride ourselves in quality residential and dementia care. We target the ageing population and particularly people with dementia. It's why we targeted Maidenhead is it's a large town that hasn't had a new care home within the last 20 years. And with an 80,000 population, there is a demonstrable need for new care homes as the population ages. At the moment, there is just under 3,000 people aged over 85 years old in the town, and that figure is due to treble within the next 20 years. We've seen from the planning officer's presentation that there's identifiable need for care homes as shown by the independent reports that have been submitted. I'd like to stress that Boutique are an operator, we're not a developer. So should we be given consent at some point, then we will develop out and operate this care home ourselves. We take absolute pride in the way we integrate with the local communities. We're an outsourcing company, which means we work with local community. We work with healthcare professionals, do a lot of dementia awareness and dementia training. We work with the local ambulance network.
Minute remaining.
Thank you. And we just basically work with the local community to spread the word about dementia. Dementia is escalating at an alarming rate and touches every one of us. And therefore, more care home beds are needed, certainly with the escalation of the ageing population and the need for dementia. We've worked on this site, we listen to the objections, we understand people's concerns and the consultees. And by working with the planning officer, we have significantly reduced the scale and massing of the building. And we believe that what we have designed now goes some considerable way to achieve what we were asked to do by reducing the size and getting out the root protection areas. And it is still a viable care home for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I call up the next speaker, which is Councillor De Campo, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Catherine Del Campo, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adults, Health and Housing. I'm here to tell you that I do believe the benefits of this application are overstated, and here's why. The report before you quotes from the Borough's own housing needs assessment from 2022. It correctly states that the number of people with dementia in the borough is predicted to rise by 810 by 2035. However, it fails to note the very next paragraph, which states, and I quote, that the projected growth for the number of people over 65 with dementia is proportionally lower than the growth for Bracknell Forest, England and the South East. Paragraph 9.47 of the officer's report speaks to the fact that we will need 853 nursing care spaces in 2035 compared to 1,103 spaces that already existed in 2021. That means we already have an oversupply of 250 nursing bed spaces to meet 2035 need. However, paragraph 9.69 of the officer's report states that we have a clear need for the provision of purpose-built accommodation for those with dementia care needs. This is misleading as it implies that we need to build new accommodation to meet future need. Well, we don't, we already have it. Please consider how much weight you give to the suggestion that this development delivers the equivalent of 31 new dwellings to the local land supply. Bear in mind that the application is for 100% one-bed rooms. There will be no couples unless they choose to live separately and pay double. Some of the residents will have a partner living at home. It's not uncommon for the family home to sit empty until a person dies and for the borough to recoup costs from the estate. With an oversupply of spaces, the home will attract people from outside the borough. So even if they do vacate the family home, it won't necessarily be local families who benefit. I also need you to consider—
Minute remaining.
Thank you. That when care home residents run out of money, it falls to the borough to pick up the bill, regardless of where they lived before entering care. There are therefore very valid reasons for not exceeding necessary supply or over-specifying accommodation to exceed the CQC's already exacting requirements. With fees of 82,000 per year, we only need 13 residents to run out of money before we're looking at an extra £1 million on the annual adult services bill. We can and do ask residents to move to more affordable accommodation, but they understandably don't want to, and some can't be moved due to frailty. I'm extremely concerned that we appear to be favouring the applicant's opinions over the expert views of our commissioning team, who actually have to provision care in the borough and gave their advice at an early stage in this process to say that our existing nursing and residential provision is oversupplied. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor De Campo. Can I call up councillor Beaumont, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak this evening as a Boyne Hill councillor on this application, which, if approved, will have a significant impact on the local area and for residents in our ward. Undoubtedly, the proposal would make an efficient use of land, and there are, of course, public benefits to providing a specialist residential care facility in Maidenhead. However, the National Planning Practice Guidance identifies that decision makers should consider the location and viability of a development when assessing applications for specialist housing for older people. And I believe that this is simply not the right location for such a scheme. There are several demonstrable planning harms that would clearly arise if this were to be approved. However, I'd like to focus my comments now on one of that I believe, contrary to the conclusions of the report, will give rise to significant and demonstrable harm. That is the serious under provision of parking on site. I share the concerns of many neighbours that the proposed parking scheme of 19 spaces for staff, visitors and deliveries is insufficient. Now, I acknowledge that the Highways Consultee response did not take issue with the parking provision, and ordinarily contradicting the judgment of Highways Authority, who have the technical expertise, is challenging. However, in this case, I'm concerned that the approach taken by Highways Consultee in relation to the way the specific adopted parking standards for care homes have been applied not only contradicts the...
I'll give you some extra time.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were...
No, there's somebody back there. We could just...
Is it all right to pause? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
You're very kind.
Want to continue, councillor Beaumont?
In this case, I'm concerned that the approach taken by Highways Consultee in relation to the way specific adopted parking standards for care homes is applied not only contradicts the planning policy, but also is at odds with how the same standards have been applied to another very similar application currently under consideration, Highway House on Norris Drive. Policy IF2 states that prior to adoption of the new parking SPD, parking standards for 2004 parking strategy will be used as a guide for determining the appropriate level of parking provision, with consideration also given to the accessibility of the site and any potential impacts associated with overspill parking in the local area. Both application sites are located in areas of poor accessibility, being more than 800 metres away from a train station, although both are served by bus routes. In accordance with the standard, the required parking allowance for one parking space for 4 residents and 1 space for full-time rental staff would equate to 34 car parking spaces for the scheme. With the Norris Drive application, Highways comments made clear they expect the 2004 standards to be met. However, with this application, it's accepted that significantly fewer spaces will not cause unacceptable harm. Now, I fully support modal shifts towards more sustainable transport, but we need to be realistic about what is likely to be achieved, even with a travel plan in place and an upgraded bus stop. It is argued that the staff will mostly live locally, but I see no evidence to support this. The fact that there will be additional pressure on parking during the shift handover periods is not adequately addressed. It's also argued that given the permanent control parking in the area, there is no reason why the local network would be unduly burdened by this development, but this assumes sufficient enforcement, and we know this is not always possible. To conclude, I believe that there are alternative ways of making more efficient use of the land without creating the level of planning harm from a total loss of a heritage asset, felling of many trees of recognised community value, and risking unacceptable parking overspill into local streets. I hope the committee consider this application very carefully, but ultimately I feel strongly that this is not the right proposal for this site, and I urge you to overturn the recommendation and refuse permission. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Monge. Can I call up the final speaker, councillor Shaw, please? When you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. Good evening. The Borough Local Plan and NPPF are clear. Heritage assets are an irreplaceable resource, and the Borough is legally bound to protect all heritage assets in line with their significance. The BLP states, promises that loss will be resisted. You are asked to weigh the known significant and demonstrable total loss of a newly identified heritage asset against the hypothetical benefits of this scheme, a scheme where every measure is pushed just beyond the bounds of RBWM policy and research best practice to meet a need asserted by the applicant, but is contrary to RBWM research. Firstly, the fact that Lawnfield House is a recognised heritage asset cannot be disputed. It has been recognised by neighbours, the Maidenhead Civic Society, Maidenhead Neighbourhood Forum, Principal Conservation Officers and Historic England for its strong local heritage interest. The site being recognised to being of archaeological interest further shows its significance is not fully known. So the assumption that it is of low value due to the recency in its acknowledgement and the current state of public enjoyment is suspect. Further, the BLP is clear that plans should conserve or enhance the significance and or setting of the borough's heritage assets. Uncovering this hidden asset should be our duty and focus, not its destruction. The Principal Conservation Officer noted it was for individual Queen Anne style design, character and detailing, and the last remaining spacious plot reflecting original historic layout of the area. Of notable architectural interest and well preserved, the notable exterior and interior features, and was one of a kind in terms of its architectural style, character and appearance within the locality. It is of landmark status and distinctive from other sites, and it is of special local interest. The BLP states that applications will only be considered if accompanied by a heritage statement, which includes an assessment of the significance and a heritage impact assessment. Unfortunately, the pre-application statement from the applicant is out of date and does not thoroughly discuss Lawnfield House, instead focusing on neighbouring heritage assets, which is insufficient to the requirements of the BLP. Aside from housing land supply, which this proposal does not help the issues, side justifications for approval include the stated likelihood of the plot having to be split, but this should not be a factor, as this is a low scale of harm to the heritage asset weighed against unknown benefits, whereas this proposal is demolition, the highest end of the scale of harm. The successfully appealed decision discussed in the report to bring a fear of appeal is not a like-for-like representation, as a heritage asset in that case was used as a hotel and had been heavily modified, affecting its historic worth and the weight of its importance, whereas Lawnfield House is very notably well preserved. After careful consideration of the known losses versus the shaky benefits, I feel I must ask that this proposal be rejected.
Thank you, councillor Shaw. So before we move on to the general debate, does anybody have any specific questions of the officers after hearing all the speakers in the presentation? If you'd like to press your button, if you've got anything specific to ask. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask the officer, there's about parking. There's been quite a few representations indicating that the parking provision is approximately half. And I want to know what's happened to the other half and why we're accepting this level of parking on this site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillor Hill. Did you want to answer that, Nicole?
Thanks, councillor Hill. Ultimately, the site is just over 800 metres away from the train station, and although it's classified in theory as poor accessibility, there are mitigating circumstances. There are 2 bus stops within 4 minutes of the site. There are the nature of employment expected, or those working there, the care facilities would and do tend to come from the local areas. This is quite well established, given the nature of people who would work there. And the standards, the parking standards that we've got are maximum parking standards from 2004. And ultimately, the current NPPF guidance does state in paragraph 113 that maximum parking standards should only be applied if there's clear and compelling justification. In this instance, we've got controlled parking on the streets, so there really isn't a lot of choice for those using cars, and there will be a lot greater incentive for them to get to work in a more sustainable manner. And accordingly, the highway officers looked at the details, and on this specific site concluded that 19 spaces is acceptable.
Councillor Hill, did you want to come back on that?
The officer's response, Chairman.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any specific questions surrounding parking that are on the screen already? Councillor Singh.
Sorry, Councillor Singh, can you turn your mic on?
Figure reports on traffic congestion, as there are 5 schools in this area.
Not aware of any specific reports on traffic congestion. The road itself, Bath Road, is a main distributor road. So it goes from a lower hierarchy roads to a higher hierarchy road, i.e. the A404. And I'm not aware that there's congestion on that particular road. It is at the very north of Westmorland Road, so it's not as if one goes further into the residential enclaves of Westmorland Road. It is at the very northern tip of that road, adjacent to Bath Road, onto that main distributor road. We're expecting 110 vehicles movements per day, 8 movements in the peak hours, AM and PM peak. So it's spread out throughout the day when congestion arguably wouldn't be as prevalent.
Thank you.
Sorry, should I just add?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've just got to add that the application has obviously been reviewed by our highways colleagues, and if they had needed that congestion study, they would have raised a request for it. But on top of that, they will have their own figures on areas of congestion in the entire highway network in the borough. So from that point of view, they didn't raise any objections on potential congestion in the area. It's probably worth noting that a lot of those trips are to do with staffing levels because they're changing shifts and so on. So that's why it's very much spread throughout the full day and possibly into evening shift and early morning shift. So that's why there isn't a peak level with the use in terms of traffic movements. I hope that clarifies it a little more.
Thank you. Councillor Bra, you raised your hand if you've got a query about parking and traffic. Thank you. Go ahead.
Why there's no traffic assessment report? Why there's no traffic assessment report? And why we don't have a highway officer present again to answer questions?
Yes, please.
As I mentioned when I answered the earlier question, there's no highway report per se on this one because highways already have the data for this. We did have highway data submitted with the application, hence the information around the number of movements to and from the site as proposed. So it's not that there's no data, but the data is focused on the activity that the site would generate. And that is what highways have made the assessment on. They already have the data for the local road network, so they wouldn't need that data. They would prefer to use their own. Second question. Sorry, can you just remind me on the second question?
I think Councillor Bra's got another one anyway, so she's. Did you want to go ahead, Councillor Bra?
No, it's just I'm asking, a highway officer shouldn't be here.
Yes.
Councillors' questions.
This is,
And okay, they can sit in the office and probably looking at the data, but have they been on site? Is there any assessment report from the highway officer? That's what I'm asking for. There's nothing in the report.
there will be a response from the highways officer. What I will say, the reason we have discussed this internally on whether to have expert consultees at committee, but given that the planning process is around the planning officer weighing up a number of different consultation responses, I think the view is that it would, if we were to have, we either have all the consultees or none of them. But then I think it would add to the confusion, because the purpose of the consultees is to give their expert view from their particular speciality, and then we use that under the planning policy and legislation in terms of weighing up the application in the round, which is why it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to have a highways officer here without all the other consultee responses as well, because it would skew the balance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barr. Can I go next to Councillor Douglas, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just a question about the word dwellings. In 9.177, the text says the rooms created are not quite classified as dwellings. I mean, on face value, that would mean that the development, or any sort of development like this would, well, in this case, you're going down from one dwelling to zero, which is, you know, given the pressure we're under to, you know, add more dwellings in the borough, that's on the face of it quite perverse. Just, what can you explain where they're not dwellings, but they're also dwellings in other contexts in the report and in the presentation?
Thanks, Councillor Douglas. The housing delivery test rulebook basically is a provision from central government specifically for care homes at C2 use class, and there's a calculation done on how many bed spaces are proposed, i.e. in this instance we've got 58 bed spaces, and when you put that into the matrix calculation, the figure based on the bed requirement is 31 dwellings. So effectively this is 31 dwellings towards the 5-year housing supply.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Douglas?
Just briefly, if I may, thank you, Chair. So yeah, I get what you're saying then. So it's kind of like there's a substitution for what the dwellings it's freeing up. That's how the NPPF sort of describes it. So there's the assumption there is that when a person moves into this care accommodation, they're freeing up a dwelling somewhere else. So yeah, I mean, I guess the assumption that person moving into the care home is from the borough in the first place. It's sort of built into that. Just, I think what Councillor Del Campo is questioning, that's on my mind.
Shall I just?
Yeah, go
ahead. Just to clarify, yes, it is about freeing up units, but the housing delivery test is not about protecting the council, the borough in its own right. It's looking for release of that wherever they arise. So I know it's not necessarily what you want to hear, but the way the test works is not necessarily saying they can only come from the same borough in which the unit is, the accommodation is provided. So that's worth keeping in mind, because that is how the planning inspector would look at it. So regardless, it would be freeing up a dwelling somewhere else, we would hope, within the borough. Yeah, overall, they're looking at the overall release.
And that's the point that I was thinking about as well. It doesn't, you know, people go into care homes, they don't always sell their house or, you know, open it up for rental purposes. Quite often the house remains empty for the duration that they're in the care home. So I don't know if there's any stats on that, but that's a question I would have had as well.
For a bit of background on this is that, and it may be the applicant provide clarity on this, but from reports I've had on previous care facilities, the length of time that people stay in these care facilities is usually fairly short. It's not long-term care, particularly when you look at the kind of needs that they're looking to meet here. And the age limit the age cap is higher than usual. So quite often you see 55 or 60. Here it's 65. They're looking at an age of over 85. And that's quite normal in this type of provision. It's unlikely that we would have anybody staying there for a decade or so. That's rare. They usually come in for a shorter period, hence the reason that property will get released earlier. So I mean, I can't guarantee that, but it's come up on numerous other studies on other care home facilities, both here and where other authorities I've worked at. So there's a general kind of assumption there that it's not long term.
Thank you, Louise. Could I go next to Councillor Waters, please?
Madam Chairman, I wouldn't like to see this building disappear. I'll tell you why. It's a bit of old Maidenhead. It's on the Bath Road. It's a long-designated heritage asset. It's near a listed building. It's quite a handsome building in it as well. And when in the report it talks about what is it here? The tree officer objects to the scheme and considers, the root protection areas are insufficient and so on. And he's rather dismissed in the report by the other officers, not tree officers, other officers, saying that they've looked at it all, they can't agree. But the applicants, our cultural officer does agree. Not surprising. Also, the conservation officer specifically says that significant harm will be done for this area. So it sounds to be that all the pluses or all the things quoted on the screen not a few moments ago mentioned about the advantages and the disadvantages. And all the advantages of keeping the building are environmental. And all those trees going down, it just seems all really wrong. And I certainly would like, maybe it's a bit early stage, but I would like to propose a refusal against officer's recommendation.
Yeah, I'll just bring Louise in now. So you would like to make a motion to refuse, yeah? Just to confirm.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
I'm just going to hand over to Louise first.
Thank you, Chair. What I will emphasise is this is not a designated heritage asset. It's not a listed building. It's a non-designated heritage asset. So it goes on something called the local list. In terms of weighting, the weighting on a non-designated heritage asset is low because the recognition, if it were a building of national importance, it would have been statutory listed. There was an application to list the building to English Heritage. To English Heritage, sorry, my mistake. Yes, there was an application to have the building listed to English Heritage. English Heritage's view is that these buildings are not uncommon. They are quite a common feature, not just within the borough, but elsewhere. So they had no interest in listing it. They suggested that we include it on our local list if it was to be of interest. So what I'm trying to clarify here is the level of
Sorry, Councillor Waters can't hear what you say.
I'm so sorry, Councillor Waters. I'll try and speak up a little for you.
Please.
It just means that the protection for a non-designated heritage asset is very limited and its weighting is very limited. It is very different to a designated heritage asset. For example, there was some mention earlier about the heritage statement, and that focused on statutory listed buildings that are opposite the site on Bath Road, which is important because obviously their setting is required to be protected. Turning on to the trees matter, the tree officer raised concerns about root protection areas. This is what we call an area TPO. And area TPOs by their nature are more about the leafiness of the site rather than individual trees. So does it still retain its leafiness? Given that all the trees to the Bath Road boundary are to be retained and many of the trees to both the other boundaries, to the east and west would be retained. I think, in my view, that the leafiness would be maintained. Alongside that, there is a condition attached, or conditions attached, that are recommended that are all about protecting the root protection zone. So there are conditions there to do that, because we recognise the comments from the tree officer. The tree officer's comments were very absolute. And we understand that that's their job, is to give us the absolute, so we can then look at ways to try and mitigate the harm. And in this case, we looked at it, reviewed with the applicants and their agents, and found ways to ensure that the root protection zone could be maintained, hence the condition. So I hope that provides some clarity for you. I hope that was a little bit clearer for you, Councillor Waters. Oh, Nick just wants to add something.
You do
Nick, do you want to go ahead?
Did you hear that all right?
Plan does include larger root protection areas than the previous iteration. So the applicant has maximised to the best of their ability the root protection areas to the north. It's a subtle change, but it is in the turquoise on that particular plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Waters, before I move on?
Yeah, just not much. I see they pray and aid the officers of 4.7 housing supply. Well, it's not far away from the 5 years, is it? So that's a pretty slender argument. And when they talk about compelling arguments, I think the trees, the handsome part of the building that it is that, it's been there since the 19th century, and we're losing so much of Maidenhead just to go around it now. We just can't afford to lose any more places. And this is a rather dominating proposal. And it's just going to be another building which everybody's going to look at and not be very thrilled about. I know that sounds a bit non-planning, but it's true. People, feel for these things, and they like to see a decent looking building. And this house, Lawnfield. Yeah, Lawnfield is a handsome looking house, as I said before. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Can I just bring in James, actually, just wants to have a...
Yeah, just as we're talking about, obviously, harms associated with development or impacts, how you want to phrase it, just do bear in mind, just when we're obviously discussing these issues, that the test under the tilted balance is significant and demonstrable. There's a much, much, much higher threshold than would be happening under a sort of a flat panelling balance. So that level of harm's got to be significant, so it's got to be demonstrated quite easily, and it's got to be demonstrable as well. So you've got to be able to evidence it very clearly. That's a very, very, very high bar to reach. Now, just in terms of the points of trees, the officers have recommended conditions be put in place. And you only put a condition in place if you can make a development acceptable with that condition. So that's why it's being used. And we don't have absolute definitive harm on the tree here. We've got potentials, and there will always be potentials. So in terms of when you're debating the development tonight, please do bear in mind that the tree officer's consultation response isn't an absolute, but the threshold that you need to use in terms of coming to a decision is a very, very high one, and it's almost an absolute threshold as well.
Thank you, James. I do actually think there's some mixed views on this. I'm just reading on 9.78. It says, in the view of the conservation officer, loss of Lawnfield would amount to less than substantial harm to the significance of the nearby listed buildings at the lower end of the scale when considered in isolation. However, it would contribute to the incremental harm from modern large-scale developments along the Bath Road in close proximity to the listed cottages, which I believe are opposite, which raises the level of harm to a moderate level. So there seems to be differing harm levels listed in their own conservation officer's report there, 9.78.
I think that's because the conservation officer has done that in 2 stages. So they've looked at the non-designated heritage asset first and decided that in its own right is low. But when you're taking account of the setting of the statutory listed buildings, which clearly that is under the legislation a requirement to preserve or enhance the setting, then that adds weight. Hence the reason on its own it's low. With the listed buildings, it's moderate, but in the wider context of there being more larger buildings along Bath Road. So that's the context they've given it. So it's context is the second one, individual is the first, if that helps. Thank you.
Can I bring Councillor Hill in next, please?
It's come on, good. Yeah, two things I want to raise. One is on this non-designated heritage asset, and the other I want to go back to the parking. So I'm real concerned on the parking. But the conservation officer in 9.29 comments of architectural or artistic interest of the building, and the conservation officer goes on to say in that the building is of notable architectural interest through its design, well preserved, late Victorian villa, Queen Anne style. And then the conservation officer goes on to saying it's of historic interest, obviously well preserved residential building again, and the site gives rise to archaeological interest of past human activity worthy of expert investigation. So whilst it's a non-designated heritage asset, it does seem to be rather an important one. And I worry that if it's knocked down, then we're losing something quite special. But I make that. I want to go back and talk about parking and highways, as is my wont quite often. My concern here is very simple. We've got 19 spaces when the allocation should be 31. And then in the officer's report, page 106, or 1.16 with the recommendations to approve, it has highways, the ongoing implementation and monitoring of the following points. And it's quite extensive. There's a travel plan, parking management plan, including booking system for visitors. Frankly, I think that's a little unrealistic. If you're visiting a parent or relative, you sort of want to go when you've got to go, particularly when circumstances are getting close to the end, shall we say? May I try and put that politely and sensitively? Ineligibility of future occupants to obtain local on-street parking permits unless medical reasons permit. We're sort of admitting here that the parking is going to overflow and you've got a book to go on the site, which is rather worrying. We have a bus stop improvement plan. I mean, I carry the bus responsibility in the borough as well as highways, so it's sort of welcome. Commitment to funding for the provision of an upgrade of the closest eastbound bus stop on the A4, works to comprise shelters, seating, real-time passenger information. I thought we had that, but obviously not on that bus stop. Section 106 contribution of 29k. And then we go further down the section 278 works, which are reasonably extensive. So whilst I can see where the officers are coming from, my concern is very much that we're sort of trying to squeeze a quart into a pint pot here. We're admitting that the parking is inadequate, so we're trying to work around it. And then we're saying that it's a sustainable location. And we've seen what sustainable location means in the town centre and places like Greenfields, where people park all over the pavements. So I'd like the officer to address those points, because it is a worry that we're going to have overflow of parking onto the street, which will cause a hazard and which will cause people to park on the street illegally. Then someone's going to call, well, it might not be me, but going to want traffic wardens to come round and enforce. It was like we're creating a rod for our own back with overflow parking on the street. And suggesting that people will use the bus frequently. Well, I want people to use the buses. particularly the subsidised ones, otherwise we can't carry on subsidising them. But it is rather optimistic in my view. So yeah, I've said a lot, Chairman, apologies for that, but maybe the officer can give me a view on that.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Nick, did you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Councillor Hill. I think ultimately when reading the highway officer's comments and their request for section 106, I don't specifically see any comment there about the management of the parking provision on site. That's something that officers consider to be a suitable aspect that was agreed by the applicant. It's the highway officer doesn't foresee there to be a parking problem here. Looking at the evidence, looking at the TA, the transport assessment submitted, that details other background sites, uses trip rate data, current trip rate data, and taking into consideration the proximity to the town centre, the expectation that a large majority of the staff on site would be employed locally and commute to work in a sustainable way. Perhaps we've exaggerated the problem by having that element within the section 106. But if that is deemed to be unnecessary, then that can obviously be deleted, but it's there as a safeguarding mechanism. But I do take your point in terms of end of life care needing to be there as and when is required. In response to that, I would say that we are expecting a surplus amount of spaces in the car park proposed.
Thank you, Nick. Did you want to come back, Councillor Hill, before I move on to?
Or they're on their way to work. They don't always travel in a sustainable way. I should have walked in tonight, but hey, I've had a busy day. I drove in. So I'm as guilty as anybody of when I'm in a bit of a rush, I drive into the town centre when really I should walk. And it just concerns me that the staff, the suggestion that all, the majority or all of the staff will work local, will be from the local area. We hope they will, but if they're the other side of Maidenhead, driving will look like a realistic option, particularly if mum's just dropped 2 children off at the school. So people are usually in a hurry. So I worry about the assumptions that are being made about the way people will work and the way people will visit, because in my experience, it usually doesn't turn out like that. And, I'm thinking about the town centre and the ward I've represented for like 14 years. It really doesn't turn out like that. So that worries me. Thank you very much, Chairman. I've said enough.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Can I go to Councillor Reeves next, please?
Thank you very much. There's a couple of things that I've been noting in regard to what's been said, and in direct relation to what it says within the MPPF. So if I can cover a couple of those at the moment. So one of the first ones that I wanted to cover is around section 216 of the MPPF, which is where we're talking about obviously heritage sites and the effect of an application on a NDH. So that's our non-designated heritage asset, which I think we all agreed it's quite clear that this fits into that category. It does go on to say that when determining the application, so we have to do that in weighing applications that directly or indirectly affect the non-designated heritage asset. So it says a balanced judgment will be required having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the heritage asset. There's also a footnote as well that relates to NDH, and that is footnote 75, which says that if the NDH asset of archaeological interest which is demonstrable. And what's really good is that word demonstrable, because we've heard the word demonstrable a lot around the tilted balance and the application of demonstrable harm then when we're considering this. So it basically does say which are demonstrable of equivalent significance to scheduled monuments or should be considered subject to the policies of designated heritage assets. Now, I struggled, and I don't know why, when I tried to open the Berkshire Archaeological report, I couldn't open it on the through the public, through the application. But I've been trying to get view a copy from my colleague who sent it to me. So you have to bear with me, but I did read it, and I want to quote it because it's quite important what it says within it as well. So if you can bear with me whilst I open it, you had to email it to me because I couldn't do it. Maybe it's because his is a Mac and this is a PC, who knows? But that's not actually a good thing. If I can't get into it, that actually members of the public then also can't access quite an important document that's within the planning application. So that aside, it does say from Berkshire Archaeology. So there are potential archaeological implications with this proposed development as demonstrated by their historic environment record. And this is in the report from the officer. And the site lies about 150 metres from the site of the Castle Hill Roman villa. The villa landscapes are known to be extensive. Well, you would think so from a Roman villa. Yeah, they were quite extensive in their area, and with numerous ancillary buildings and other features. Evidence of the villa includes fragments of stone wall and hypocaust system. Sorry, I don't know what that means, but suggesting a substantial structure. But the true extent of it is still unknown. Although this is not a large-scale development, it is likely that the areas of the plot have never previously been developed. That's clear because obviously it's all lovely landscaped area and the age of the building itself. And because of that, the plot have never previously been developed, and therefore any archaeology may remain undisturbed. As shown, the application site falls within an area of archaeological significance, and archaeological remains may be damaged by ground disturbance for the proposed development. Now, remember what we were told? We were told that they're going to put a basement in this development. Well, when you go down, then you're going to hit things that are buried under the ground. For example, the remains of what could be ancillary buildings or part of this old Castle Hill Roman villa. So with that, obviously there was a condition that no development shall take place or commence until the programme of archaeological work, including a written statement of investigation, has been submitted to and approved by the local planning authority in writing. And that will include assessments of significant research questions. Now, if you take all of that and you're saying you're going to put a condition on it that no development will take place, I go back to the NPPF that says that we have to consider that if the non-designated heritage asset is of archaeological interest, well, first of all, I can clearly see that it's of archaeological interest because they're going to have to obviously dig and potentially find something. We have to consider that as well. And it's a balanced judgment. So when we talk about demonstrable harm and the weighting given, I think we as a panel have to consider that with that condition, it might bring up, who knows, they might dig up and find something really significant there that is of, high archaeological significance. What are they going to do? Will they just stop the development and then that's it? Development cancelled? Or will it have to come back to the panel? Or do we have to take it into account now? That's what I need to know, because now this has really opened up a huge can of work, for me to consider the weighting that I give in when I consider the protection of this non-designated heritage. And we talk about demonstrable and weighting, and it's clearly the NPPF says a balanced judgment will be required. So I'd like to know, and it doesn't really set it out. I mean, in the conditions, I've read through the conditions that are set out in the actual report. which is under 9.268. So given the site's age, construction, basement, etc., likelihood of finding artifacts, then as the application site falls in that area of archaeological significance and remains may be damaged by ground disturbance of the proposed development, they've recommended the potential impacts of the development they say it can be mitigated through a programme of agreed archaeological work via planning condition. But to me, you don't know what they're going to come across and how significant that's going to be, and what are they going to do? Move it? How can you mitigate it if you find something? You can't build on top of it, unless they're going to put like a nice glass floor. I've seen that happen actually in some developments, and then you can actually still see the archaeological asset underneath, and then you have to make that open to the public as well. So I think there's a lot of things that I have to consider around that, and we can't just brush under the carpet the NDH. Yes, the actual building itself we've heard about, but there is this archaeological significance of it. And I just need to understand what happens if they do find something that we as a panel would have considered way outweighs the benefit that we're going to get from it. So that's one part that I'm sort of thinking about a lot in regard to this. And then there is one other thing about the tilted balance. So under section 61 of the NPPF, it does say that, so I want to reference it clearly. So it does say delivering a sufficient supply of homes. So to support the government's objective of significantly boosting the supply of homes. And that's what we're talking about when we've been passed down this housing supply that has increased due to the current government requirement, okay? And that's what puts us into this tilted balance equation. It says in boosting the supply, it is important that a sufficient amount and variety of land can come forward where it's needed. However, that the needs of groups with specific housing requirements are addressed, and that the land with permission is developed without unnecessary delay. So the overall aim should be to meet the area's identified housing need, including with an appropriate mix of housing types for the local community. And, part of that is obviously older people, and they have to be given a special consideration within the context of establishing need, the size, the type, and the tenure needed for different groups in the community. And it should be assessed and reflecting planning policies along with that is older people. Now, if I look at that and I put all that together and I say, okay, I've got to assess this. I heard from one of the speakers already about the need and challenging that need, and that we are already in a supply that we need to cover us. So I'm being asked to look at some indications given by estate agents on what the need is going to be for that significant group. But I'm being also told by the lead member, who is an expert, I would say, or has great inside knowledge into the housing needs of the adult services for this borough, telling me that we have a supply and that supply is not we don't have an undersupply of that. So therefore, in considering the need for the appropriate mix of housing type, we don't need a new care home or for these. So I have to also consider that as well, because that's also been expressed as something we have to take into account. So the only thing I've got left is if someone can come back to me about what happens in regard to the archaeological element, and if they discover something whilst prior to the building planning, if it was granted. Thank you.
James will answer you. Off you go, James.
Thank you. I thought the clapping wasn't for me. So there's a couple of points to unwrap there. So forgive me if I miss anything. But in terms of the non-designated heritage asset status of this building, it's not to do with archaeological interest. It's to do with surface interest, basically, it's things above the ground. So it's within a zone, within a designation, where they say we should be looking at things when we start to develop sites as to what might happen underground. That's quite normal. That happens on most sites. So the interest from the site isn't an archaeological interest, which would trigger footnote 75 of the framework. It's a surface, what's on the site basically. So it's a paragraph 216. So you don't get the same protections afforded as you do through a listed building on that. So in terms of how members determine that point, paragraph 216 is the leading point, not the same weight given to a listed asset. But the reason, like I say, why that written scheme of investigation conditions on there is because it falls within one of those zones, and it's quite normal to investigate that as you develop a site. So where there's an opportunity to find things, you can find them. The only time that it really does sort of stop development on a site, in my experience, is if you find a Roman villa underneath the site, and then you want to start preserving in situ. But that's a very, very, very rare occasion, and you normally know about that before you get to that stage. There's a way you find those things out, which is called through a geophysical survey. So you look at a site under sonar, and it will basically tell you what's underground. But Berkshire Archaeology haven't requested that, and they haven't provided an objection in terms of their consultation response. So from that perspective, we don't have a consultee support in terms of that line of inquiry. Just turning to paragraph 61 of the framework, I'll just get up on my screen quickly. The key part here in paragraph 61 for members' understanding is that the needs of groups with specific housing requirements are addressed. So that places an onus upon members to consider that in their determination of applications, and that land with permission is developed without unnecessary delay. There's a key thrust there in the NPPF, supporting provision of housing for people with specific needs. And obviously, Nick's taking you through in the presentation what these needs might be. Now, there's not a cap in every planning decision. There's not a cap in terms of you reach a limit and then you stop. There is identified needs. Obviously, Nick set out 3 separate reports that have been provided by the applicant throughout the process, demonstrating there is a need. So in terms of paragraph 61, that would push us towards looking at schemes like that, granting permission for those things and allowing those to be developed without unnecessary delay. So I hope that clarifies that point.
Thank you, James. Councillor Reeves, did you want to come back before I go to Councillor Taylor?
No.
Okay. Actually, I think Nick actually wants to.
We've just dismissed that, sorry, yourself, James. We've just completely dismissed the archaeological element of it by saying it's surface only. It's only surface only because people don't know what's under there. And if it is connected to the Roman villa, then it does have to be potentially considered when you think about it. So, yeah, okay, I'll take it on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Nick, did you want to come in first and then Louise?
I'll do first because I'm just going to do a quick one-liner here.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the designated heritage asset is above ground, but it's not a non-designated heritage asset because of archaeological interest. That's a separate entity entirely, and that comes under the archaeological aspect and Berkshire archaeological advice that we've been given. So they're different things. They're not the same thing. So the non-designated heritage asset is about the building, not about what's underneath it. That's treated separately. And I think Nick's going to come in and clarify how it's been managed with the application. Is that okay, Nick?
You said about the reports from estate agents. The Carterwood report isn't a estate agent. Yeah, they are, if they're not, from the report itself and from the website, they speak of being a multi-award winning property advisor dedicated to social care, who provide market analysis services and software to investors, developers and operators within the elderly care home and retirement living sectors. Knight Frank, they do have if you like, a property portfolio as well. They do, but they're an estate agent arm, but Carterwood is not of the same ilk.
Thank you, Nick.
Just one last.
Okay.
I would just add on the archaeological aspect, we have put the conditions on or recommended conditions so that the appropriate actions are taken, including dead space assessment and so forth. So that is recommended alongside this.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the same time, so are we off the just asking questions? Because I don't have any questions, but I do have a few points I want to make. Is that okay? Thank you. I don't agree with the reports that have been made regarding lack of supply. In the last 7 days alone, within a 5-mile radius, 29 properties for care and residential are currently available in this area. You have to kind of remember that these aren't dwellings, these are rooms. Now, I lost my mum to dementia a 1.5 years ago. She went from being cared for at home to going into hospital to going into a care home. Her brother, they were twins, and my uncle, he never went that far. His last days were at home. But the time that patients are generally in care is relatively short. It's quite a high turnover, and turnaround is very quick in care homes that deal with dementia. I'm really concerned about parking. Families and people that know dementia patients lose so much, and it is a very, very difficult journey. By the time they get to a care home, they want to be spending as much time as possible. And often when they go, what they call end of life, which is generally in the last week, you're going to have people in and out wanting to spend as much time with them as possible. So it's particularly important that there is parking available. And when you're looking at 19 spaces, bear in mind you're going to have staff. Not all staff are going to come in sustainable. We're talking about a sustainable location as the crow flies. You know, this location is at the top of Castle Hill. I used to go to Maidenhead College, and let me tell you, that hill is very steep and very, you know, difficult to get up if you're anything other than super fit or doing it every day. I can't make peace with the fact that people would be walking up that hill, especially people who are coming to see end-of-life patients. It's traumatic enough. You want to be there as quick as possible, and that is going to be in a car. You're also going to have private ambulances. You're going to have care home staff changing shifts. This is going to be a very busy location. On a main road, this is the A4, where everything, when there is a problem on that M4, we all know it all comes off onto the A4. You've got red roofs over the road, which again is a high traffic location. You've got Tesco's across the road, which again is a high traffic location. I don't believe currently, as this stands, parking is adequate in any way, shape or form. Looking at the street scene, yes, whilst I can appreciate what the officers have said, that the retention of trees on the borders is going to make it leafy. From the street scene, which is the front, the majority of those trees are gone. Currently, that is a quite nicely enclosed, secluded plot with lots of trees, which is going to be opened right up, which is very much going to change the street scene. If you're standing at the A4, looking down the road like I am right now on Google Maps, the left-hand side of that road is all leafy trees. That's going to be a huge change in the scenery. And I know there is no way around that, but I don't think it's a good use of that site currently as the plans stand. I mean, people have mentioned the heritage side of it, but I don't think enough care has been given to think about dementia care patients are quite specific in their needs and in their care. And I agree with Councillor Del Campo. I think we have got an oversupply. A much more sustainable use of our time would be to retrofit the care homes we have. dementia care is very, very secure. It's like Fort Knox trying to get in and out. It's very easy to retrofit places that we already have. I don't agree with the weight that is being given to lose such a pretty house on a nice site. I don't believe that A, this is a good use of that site and a good excuse to demolish it, and B, I don't agree with the weighting given to the housing need. I don't believe there is a need. I would be minded to vote for refusal based on those comments. However, I will let other people speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to make any comments about what you've raised there, but I thought it would be helpful to note that the building has been vacant for somewhere in the region of 14 years. And it has been heavily marketed. So it's not a building that's occupied. Sorry, is this a meeting in public, not a public meeting?
No, there's no speaking from the public, I'm afraid, so, yeah.
That's not information.
No public speaking in this meeting. It's not that sort of meeting.
Yes.
Sorry.
So our understanding is the building has been vacant for some time.
Can we not have interruptions, please?
To clarify, the building is occupied by people called guardians. So they live in the property to stop it being vandalised. You get guardians on lots of vacant properties. So there are people living there, but they're not living there in terms of of a primary dwelling or for any other intentional use. They're there to protect the property in security terms. And we do have quite a lengthy marketing history for the site too.
Councillor Taylor, can we not have any interruptions? Sorry, it's not that sort of meeting. Can I bring in Councillor Taylor, please?
Thank you. Sorry, in that case, I'd also just like to say that my concern also lies with the massive increase in trip generation that this is now going to generate, because if there are only guardians in that property or it's been vacant for however many years, this is going to be quite a significant change in the trips on that location. Now, they're not going to go, well, we hope they're going to go on straight onto the A4 if they're coming out of their location, but 9 times out of 10, they probably won't, because that is quite a congested road. They're going to go down the residential roads, all the way down Grenfell Road and through the town centre. The town centre already, as we know, has got issues. I don't see how this is going to work, and I don't agree with the comments that have been made by Highways about A, traffic congestion, B, trips, and C, parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. You did mention, just before you spoke just there, that you would be minded to refuse it. There is actually a motion on the table already from Councillor Walters along the same avenue as what you're describing. So I don't know, it's something that you would consider seconding. But he's next to speak, Councillor Walters. Hold on a second, okay, Councillor Walters, I'll come back to you in a second. Councillor.
I would be happy to second.
You would be happy to second. Can I come back to Councillor Walters to?
This debate's gone on far too long in my estimation, it really has. The whole thing is in one sentence. The loss of the non-designated heritage assets is justified by the lack of a 5-year supply. I read through this report just briefly. They really give the conservation officer a hard time, also the tree officer. But I've already proposed refusal against the officer's recommendation. I don't know how many seconds I've got one at least.
Does you do actually have a seconder if Councillor Taylor agrees with what you've just stated there? She may have stuff she might add that you might want to consider, but.
I can't hear.
I'm just writing this up as we speak, so I just want to check where the issue is with the trees. What reason are you raising around the trees in terms of
Well, we don't
refusal
want
reason?
TPO trees knocked down. I mean, obvious. I mean, I think we're getting a hard time on this thing, Madam Chair. That's why it's gone on so long.
clarification from councillor Waters beyond what he's.
It's lots of TPO trees, I'm assuming.
He had lots of TPO trees, councillor Waters, and the designated heritage asset, wasn't it, non-designated heritage asset?
And the effect on the 5-year housing land supply as a residential property.
Yes.
That was my understanding.
That was my
Is
understanding.
that correct, councillor Waters?
I can't hear what
She's saying to do with the 5-year house and land supply.
Yeah, well, we thought, we got 4.7, that's not going to change the thing, is it? Shouldn't do.
Councillor Waters, Louise is just trying to clarify your full motion, so,
Yeah.
you know. And then see if
Okay.
councillor Taylor's happy to second that.
Object to a non-designated building, okay, a very
Trees.
handsome building, which is perfectly all right. It's in a part of Maidenhead, which are other similar buildings in the Boyne Hill area. The conservation officer being dead against it. The tree officer as well. I don't know how many more reasons you need. All this high bar business, I mean, I think it speaks for itself. Is there any more? Do you want any more?
Let's put that through as a proposal.
Yeah.
Just that way. Councillor Taylor, would you be happy to second what councillor Waters has listed? You happy with what?
Oh, the archaeology, do you remember?
Councillor Taylor, are you happy with what councillor Waters has listed? Are you happy to second? So far, we need the wording back really, don't we? But to see if councillor Taylor's happy.
Councillor Reid made a point about archaeology, that's another one.
Did you want to add that into your motion?
Yes,
Yeah.
if the officers consider it appropriate.
It's because, let me just work this out.
Should I go to some other speakers while you're working out wording?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
I've got quite a
going-
few of you on this list still, and obviously we've got quite a few things.
Thank you. Okay, let you go first. Yeah, that's fine.
The technology is not serving us very well tonight. It's going a bit crazy. Now everything's gone. Yeah, I'd like to, I was going to propose refuse, but councillor Waters and councillor Taylor have got in there before me. If councillor Waters is minded to accept this, I'd like to add in the parking provision, because I think the parking provision is too low for this site at 19 spaces. And I also believe it's an overdevelopment of the site. And the officers have asked in the report, I want you, it's not a confession, but there's a lot of things being pushed in the direction of highways and also in the direction of buses, which clearly indicates that the site really is not sustainable in this location. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking for so much Section 106 money and so many changes to be made to the, to the highway to change the entrance. So I want to include parking if you're minded to accept that, councillor Waters.
You'd be happy to add those? Okay, parking and buses as well. Thank you. Can I bring back councillor Bra? You've knocked off the screen.
What I'm worried about is the mess and the scale. It's surrounded by like 1900 properties. It's going to look like a place. It's the mess and the scale. And the other thing I want to say, there was 2022, end of 2022, in my ward, there was a permission given to a similar care home for 20 more bed spaces. So as the lead member said, there are enough spaces. We don't need any more in the borough. On that, I would like that to sort of add that onto the motion as well. And my other thing is, why the sill to the officers, why the sill's been halved on this Lawnfield? And are we sort of relying on the applicant or on their evidence too much?
Thank you, councillor Bra. Your first couple of points would be up to councillor Waters if he wishes to add the scale.
Scale, mass
and mass on
Yeah,
to,
overdevelopment of the
it's
site.
up to council board if you
Yeah.
agree with that. Before I move to councillor Jack Douglas, you had a quick question, didn't you, about the sill being halved?
Sorry, I can answer that.
Councillor Boyer.
The reason for that, I think we explained earlier, was to do the housing delivery test. That although there's 197 beds, the equivalent would be 31 residential units under the test. So therefore, the sill's been calculated on that basis. I think Nick just wants to step in because he might have more clarity than I've just provided.
Sorry, can you hear me now, councillor Brock? Yeah, the application originally was for 70 bed care home, and it's been reduced obviously to 58. So the error accrued in the sense of floor area of the new proposal, and there's a matrix done on per square metre of residential floor space against the sill charge, and when one puts in the calculation, it does equate to, as I say, the lower figure. So it was an error that was unforeseen, unfortunately.
Thank you, Nick. I believe Catriona Herbert, who's online, would like to come in. Apologies, Catriona, I didn't introduce you. I didn't know you were there. Sorry.
No problem, Chair. Just for the benefit of if you can hear me okay, just to mention I'm the legal advisor to the committee, and I just wanted to jump in now in discussions on the reasons for refusal, and just for members to bear in mind when they're considering their reasons, the situation, particularly with around parking and archaeology, bearing in mind there's no highway objection. So they're vulnerable. The council may be vulnerable in relation to any challenge on refusal on the grounds where they're not vulnerable. And officers clearly have concerns. It's been a lengthy debate. Officers do have concerns in relation to a refusal being defendable at all. But I'll be I hope you be guided by Louise and James in that regard, because I think they are looking at that. And it is open. Members, do have they have expressed some concerns about the scale and mass and the size of the development on the site. But I think Louise and James have some views on that. But I just wanted to express my concerns about the exposure in an appeal on costs, particularly where there's no objection from the council's specialist departments in that regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Catriona.
Tree officer.
Do you mind if I come back to you in a moment, Councillor Water? There's still quite a few people to speak, and I'd like to get closer to a vote if we can. So, Councillor Douglas next, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I guess it's a bit of a clarification question for the proposal. Does it constitute Councillor Waters is not listing separate reasons for refusal. He's suggesting that collectively these different harms add up to significant demonstrable harm. Is that correct?
Bring an officer in on that. Sorry, Councillor Douglas was saying, with all the list of reasons that we have, would that add more weight?
Sorry, would you like me to repeat it?
Would you mind? Yeah.
Sorry, Louise. Yeah. So what I'm asking is, the motion is coming up on the table. It's not like a list of 20 different reasons standing on their own that would result in rejection. Am I right in understanding that the argument is that collectively they add up to significant potential harm?
Let me just put the microphone on. We can go through the reasons we've written up in just a moment, but my concern would be that what we're trying to meet is the substantial and demonstrable test, which is a very, very high bar on tilted balance.
Yeah, I'm just specifically
Yeah,
asking.
in my view, the weight that's coming forward on these reasons for refusal are low. They're below the threshold quite significantly, and some are not evidenced.
So I'm not sure you specifically addressed my question, whether we're looking at them collectively or not.
Even if you look at them collectively,
Yeah,
the weight is very limited.
But are we looking at them collectively or not?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, we can run through them now.
No, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking if we're looking at them collectively. Yes or no, really? And if we are, then there's probably no reason not to add to the list all the other harms identified in the reports, because there are quite a few others.
The harms that you're bringing forward must be evidenced and substantiated. Otherwise, we are very vulnerable to costs.
So just to name
because
a
of the
few
nature
more.
of the application, costs
So
will be
just to
high.
name a few more from the report, we've got the harm to the nearby listed buildings and other surrounded dwellings. We've talked about the dominance of the proposed building, increased level of overlooking, harm to the local environment, which, you know, all of these are phrases from the report, they're not things I'm suggesting. So if we're looking at a motion that collectively sort of demonstrates significant level of harm that we're talking about, significant demonstrably outweighs the benefit, we need to probably put all of those in, if Councillor Wattles gives us permission to add the others as well.
I mean, the reasons for refusal have to stand on their own rights. Yes, when you look at it from a tilted balance perspective, the harms have got to amount in combination, basically. That's the threshold that the tilted balance imposes. That's applying the tilted balance to decision making. But I think where we're at if I'm reading the debate correctly, looking at reasons for refusal, what we're trying to advise you here is where would we stand as a local planning authority in terms of an inspector and an appeal taking this forward. Now, that's a very different test that makes sense to the tilted balance test, because every reason for refusal has got to stand on its own two rights. So you could have, for example, an application for cost taking against you if one of your reasons for refusal, or more than that, were deemed to be unreasonable. So that's why we've got to make sure that the reasons for refusal stand on their own. But if you were minded to be looking at a refusal and taking that into account, the tilted balance, you'd be adding up all the harms together. That's not an invitation just to add everything in, because you've got to make sure things stand on their own right.
Sorry, I'm confused. If harms have been identified in the reports, they all add up collectively. So why should we not add all the harms that have been specifically itemised in your report to the list for the collective harm?
I'll answer this. Essentially, harm is always identified in any application. By definition, a development will cause a degree of harm. That's not necessarily a reason to refuse it. And if you were to use those individual harms and try and put them together collectively, we would have to evidence and substantiate each and every one of them. For example, you mentioned amenity. There's clear evidence that the amenity impact meets the policies, it addresses the policies, so there's sufficient distances involved to offset that. So to then look at amenity as a refusal reason in order to add weight to it would actually do the opposite. It would undermine the more substantive refusal reasons. So it's one of those things, and if we were to do that, we've pretty much got automatic costs awarded against us at an appeal for basically being unreasonable in our decision making.
The harm to the listed building nearby falls into that category, is what you're
There
saying.
is, the harm level was identified by the conservation officer as moderate. That is not a level that we would normally refuse at. We're looking for high to refuse. And so that level just isn't enough for us to use that as a refusal reason. So I'm just trying to sort of help clarify it. So it's about a refusal reason has to be strong enough and evidenced to stand on its own 2 feet and to not be able to overcome it by condition or section 106. So it needs to be, in effect, a showstopper, if that helps. on its own 2 feet. And when you're talking about collectively, which, yes, is correct, you weigh them up together, but the inspector will be weighing them up against tilted balance, amongst other things. But when you weigh them together, they have to have their own solidity in order to count together. Does that help at all? Not really. Okay. I'm trying to think of another way to explain it.
So are you saying that I should not ask councillor Walters to add in the harm to the listed buildings, because that would undermine our case?
Yes. James is going to step in because he might have an easier way of explaining it.
Forgive my terminology, I wouldn't normally do this in a public forum, but it's quality, not quantity. That's the simple answer. So more doesn't mean stronger. It's quality over quantity, basically.
Yeah, so what does collectively mean then?
I mean, it's added up together, but you've still got to have quality reasons for refusal added together. It's not about the amount, if that makes sense. It's about the quality of those reasons for refusal looked at together.
That's fine. So the listed buildings nearby is not a quality reason in terms of the moderate harm that's been identified.
You're the decision.
You're
the decision maker. I mean, obviously Nick set out in his report his view on that, but that's a judgment that you would need to make as a decision maker yourself.
In which case, I'll ask councillor Walters if he's willing to add it to his motion or not. The harm to the nearby listed buildings, I'm just asking if you're willing to add it to your motion.
I should be voting the other way. I'm 92 years of age. Anybody with a hair care, but I'm not voting there because I think it's utterly wrong. Sorry, what did you say?
Listed building and
Yeah, listed building is another reason. I mean, they think they're making it hard for us. We'd like advice from officers sometimes about reasons for refusal, not just plugging their own thing all the time. This is a committee that makes a decision.
Do we have a list of refusal reasons ready to read out? Because then before I can go back to councillor Taylor, because obviously she seconded the motion, so.
So you will have to give if I've missed any here, but I'm sure you will tell me if I've missed any. So it might have to take you through one by one, just in terms of for complete transparency, where you would stand as an inspector or as a council. We'd have to look at this. So the first reason for refusal I've got written here is to do with the non-designated heritage asset. That says the development would lead to a loss of a non-designated heritage asset, which the scale and harm of the loss is not outweighed by other factors, contrary to paragraph 216 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Just on that point to make you aware, obviously Nick's report has set out what we as officers deem to be other factors and where that balance sits. Obviously, if that were going to an appeal, we'd have to demonstrate why those factors aren't relevant. In my advice to you, I think we'd struggle on that and we could be open to costs, but that is just the advice I've got to give you in full transparency. Then the second reason for refuse I've got is the development will result in harm on the adjacent listed buildings, which are not outweighed by public benefits, contrary to paragraph 215 of the National Planning Policy Framework. And again, public benefits is to do with all the social economic benefits that are set out in Nick's report in terms of obviously, healthcare provision, lack of reliance upon the NHS, et cetera, it's all set out in Nick's report. So again, we would struggle to substantiate that reason for refusal at an appeal, but obviously that's what you've asked me to write. The next reason for refusal I've got is the loss of a dwelling would result in the net loss of a dwelling when the borough is unable to demonstrate a sufficient 5-year housing land supply, contrary to policy H05 of the borough local plan. And obviously Louise has advised you tonight that the site has been vacant for 14 years. There's evidence to support that as well. And Nick's obviously set out the planning practice guidance in terms of the circa 30 units that would release onto the market. So again, we would struggle to substantiate that reason for refusal as well. But again, that's what you've asked me to write. So that's how we've termed it. The fourth reason for refusal would be the development would lead to adverse impacts upon adjacent trees, contrary to policy NR3 of the borough local plan. To make sure we phrase that as would lead to adverse impacts, we cannot specify based upon the tree officer's consultation response that there will be harm. So it's all about potential harm, does that make sense? So again, that high level bar isn't quite there. So again, we'd be open to costs in that respect as well. Then reason refuse number 5 would be the development would result in an over dominant appearance owing to the proposed scale and massing of the building, which will result in harm to the character of the area, contrary to policy QP3 of the Borough Local Plan. And again, Nick set out why the design is deemed to be acceptable in officers' view, the mitigating factors around the tree planting around the sites, and how the character of the area would be conserved in that regard. So again, I think we would struggle to justify that reason for refusal at an appeal as well. And then finally, reason for refusal number 6 would be the development would result in a level of development that would generate adverse impacts on the surrounding road network, contrary to paragraph 116 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, again, we might struggle to justify that reason for refusal because we simply don't have an objection from the Highways Authority. So I take on board what you've been saying. That's how we would have to phrase it in terms of what you've asked me to do. But I just want to make really clear to you in the interest of transparency where we would struggle moving forward. So if we are coming back to you at appeal sessions to inform us to where we've got to, then you've kind of entered into this with full knowledge of the facts, basically.
Thank you, James. Councillor Taylor, you've gone off the screen, but you were next originally.
Thank you, Chair. I understand what officers are saying. However, this isn't a residential, a normal residential build we're talking about. This is quite a specialist thing in a location where I think otherwise a normal residential building, it probably would be correct what you're saying. However, I know for a fact we've got a care home in Lawnfield. I'm not even going to go there, but the normal rules do not apply for a care home. So I get that in planning we have these blanket policies and these blanket formulas that we use to, work out certain things. Highways officers have been wrong before. And I don't mean to be obtuse, I don't mean to be disrespectful. However, I know that to be the case. We approved 49 units months ago in Maidenhead on Gringa Hill. I don't believe the supply is there. And in 1.7 of this report, it does state officers' view that these harms can be significantly outweighed by the public benefits of the application. I don't agree. That include considerable economic uplift. I don't agree. Social betterment through the provision of additional housing given the lack of the 5-year land supply. I don't agree. Together with the provision of a care home that was required by RBWM, apparently it's not, both in the present and in future years. We are talking about tilted balance and weighting, and this is what we are saying, that we don't agree with the weight that is being given to various things. And I just want that noted. I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way, shape or form. However, I feel it's important, given the reasons that you've given, that I should state why I have said what I have said, just so that it is out there in the public domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Of the reasons that have been read out, are you still happy with the second hearing? You are. Right, I'm really conscious of time. I've got Councillor Kashmir Singh on here. Have you got anything to add that anybody else has not mentioned so far?
Thank you very much. Yes. The surrounding properties to this, the garden's already flood. The building here is going to be of a much larger mass, so certainly going to add to the flooding to those properties in those gardens. And I'd like to come back to the traffic congestion. If it's 58 bed, I presume there will be at least 30 journeys in and out. And
the residents aren't in the scope for driving. It's more the people.
And we've got Red Roof Stall, which is exactly opposite. We've got Tesco's about 50 yards.
Some of these points Councillor Hill has already covered with
so
congestion.
On all the objections that have been raised, I'm minded to refuse this application.
We've already got a motion on the table. It's proposed by Councillor Walters and seconded by Councillor Taylor. So, Councillor Walters, are you happy with the motion that's been read out? If we are, then I would love to go to vote.
Parking, you've got parking.
Mr. Parking.
We've got the Civic Trust saying the parking's not good enough. We've got the Supremo Highways in our committee, Councillor Hill, who says he thinks it's wrong. And therefore the parking fee must go in as well.
Let me get the motion read out to you, Chair.
Yeah, please, yeah. Thank you, Chairman.
Motion again.
So the motion would be to refuse development for the following reasons. The development would lead to the loss of a non-designated heritage asset, which the scale and harm of the loss is not outweighed by other factors, contrary to paragraph 216 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The development would result in harm on the adjacent listed buildings, which are not outweighed by public benefits, contrary to paragraph 215 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The loss of a dwelling would result in a net loss of a dwelling when the borough is unable to demonstrate a sufficient 5-year housing land supply, contrary to policy HO5 of the borough local plan. The development would lead to an adverse impact on adjacent trees, contrary to policy NR3 of the borough local plan. The development would result in an over-dominant appearance owing to the proposed scale and massing of the building, which will result in harm to the character of the area, contrary to policy QP3 of the borough local plan. And the development will result in a level of development that would generate adverse impacts on the surrounding road network, contrary to paragraph 116 of the National Planning Policy Framework.
And
Happy with that, Councillor Waters?
Go to a vote.
yeah, just hang on a minute. Borough Local Plan QP 3A, paragraph 1, you've got that in there, have you? A new development would be generally expected to maintain the existing context heights to reinforce and reflect the character of the local area. That's in our own policy. Borough Local Plan, and it's on QP 3A. And when you talk about in the narrative about not being able to see it, that's never a reason for doing the opposite thing. That's the last thing you say in planning terms. We don't mind this development because you can't see it.
So you're happy with that then? Are we happy to go to the vote, please? Kim?
Thank you, Chair. I just need to check something with our legal officer.
Sure. Kim's just checking something on the legalities and then we should be good to go for a vote.
Okay, Chair, I'll now do a named vote. As we all know, we have a motion proposed by Councillor Walters and seconded by Councillor Taylor to refuse planning permission for the reasons outlined by James. I'll do a named vote now. Councillor Bra. Please note, councillors are being asked to vote for refusal, against refusal, or abstain. Thank you. Councillor Douglas. Councillor Hill. Councillor Martin. Councillor Reeves. Councillor Kashmir Singh. Councillor Gertsch Singh. Councillor Taylor. So that's 7 for, 1 against, 1 abstention. The motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the public, if you don't want to sit for the other agenda items, you are free to leave. I'm going to suggest also a quick comfort break as well, because that's quite a long discussion. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So, welcome back. I'm just thinking that the time is now 25 to 9, and we're recommending potentially putting back the Kimbers Lane development to an extraordinary meeting. So is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Yeah, it's just to confirm that obviously we'll get booked in at the earliest opportunity, which is in terms of constitutionally, a further meeting to cover the Kimbers Lane site. But where we are obviously in the order of proceedings tonight, I'd be reluctant to hear the third item tonight.
Is there anything that we need to vote on with regard to that decision? Okay. Oh. In the meantime, if we could move on to Tectonic Place. So if I could hand over to Mohammed to present for us all. Before actually, I think Councillor Rees, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something first before Mohammed starts his presentation?
If that's okay. Yes, please, because something was just thrown at us there that I was just need to understand. It was just quickly, quite quietly, like, are we saying Kimbers Lane is been removed, or you don't, because you don't think we have time for it, or is that not a decision that we make after we've this application?
Let me bring in James to answer your question.
So I need to understand kind of, because where my thoughts are with it.
Yeah, you need to take a vote. That makes sense, because obviously the item 3 will go beyond 9 o'clock. So obviously anything we start after 9 o'clock, members will have to vote on under the Constitution if they want to continue to hear it. But my advice would be based upon the last item, how long we were debating that for, and obviously the details that we went into. I'd just be concerned about taking decisions that late on into the process. But again, it's your decision to do that as members and take that vote. But we're just advising you as officers to just defer that application to, well, not fully defer, sorry, delay the application to an extraordinary committee, which will put on, it's about circa 5 days, it'll be about 5 days time, because it's just to get through the constitution process.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, please sort of wait until the carry on. I think then we should vote on it.
That's exactly what we're talking about absolutely now. So we'll see, because I mean, but at 9 o'clock, we would be in a position that we would do a vote anyway on that. So I think let's see where we are. So let's crack on with the Tectonic Place, and we can come back to that. Thank you.
Very quickly, thank you, Chair. Point of order. I think we agreed at a previous council meeting not to overrun the stated meeting times that we have, whether they finish at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And I think if we decide on that now, rather than when it comes to 9 o'clock, some of us have to get up very early to go to our day job. Thank you.
Mohammed is waiting to get on with.
Sorry, I was just going to ask maybe that you mull it over whilst we're carrying on. Could we not just reinstate the extraordinary meeting that was due on the 26th and have Kimbers Lane then?
I'm not sure. Let's get this presentation, and then yes, while we're doing this, and then we can come back to that. Thank you.
Everyone, this is item 2, application number 24/00082/out. Site address Tectonic Place, Holyport Road and Maidenhead. The proposal is for an outline application for the access, layout and scale only to be considered at this stage, with all other matters to be reserved for the erection of 1 new dwelling house and 10 commercial use class E units comprising part single story and part 2-story commercial units with associated parking and alteration to the existing vehicle access from Holyport Road. The report updates, we've had an additional third-party comment in relation to the committee report, which relates to the loss of trees, impact on residential amenities, potential change of use, And these matters have been addressed in the written update to committee and have also been addressed in the actual committee report. Update number 2, amendment to condition 4, which relates to commercial restriction. We've made it more specific to the business use rather than saying commercial. So that's this condition here. The following slide shows the parts which form part of this presentation. So part 1 is the overview. So majority of the site lies within a designated protected employment site, and the additional business use would be supported by policy ED1 of the Borough Local Plan. The front part of the site, fronting Holyport Road, falls outside the designation and proposes a single dwelling house. In terms of the residential use, the local planning authority is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore the tilted balance as part of the MPPF applies, and the provision of windfall housing development is also supported by the Borough Local Plan. No concerns, the MPPF then states, well, the NPPF in terms of the tilted balance states that the development should be approved unless harms arising significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme when taken as a whole. No concerns have been raised by highways and flood risk officers. Third parties have objected regarding the removal of the trees, access arrangement, flood risk, the new dwelling and commercial buildings in terms of the impact on the amenities of neighbouring properties. The harms found are not to be significant and demonstrable nature when taking into account the overall benefits of the scheme. Therefore, the scheme is recommended for planning approval. Proposed development. So the scheme proposes 10 use class E commercial units within the context of the existing office building form and footprint, and 1 new dwelling house. The access layout and scale are only to be considered, which are part single and part 2-storey. The vehicle access, as mentioned, is from Holyport Road. The southern part of the site that is affected by surface water flooding is characterised as low. Here we have the location plan and an aerial view of the site, and site photos. So you've got the entrance into the site east of Holyport Road, the first 2 images, and the third image is the central part of the site where you can see the existing 2-storey office blocks, and the northern boundary is the last image, which is shared with Applecroft, and as you can see there are no openings in that elevation there facing the application site. This is the building height plan, which shows the single and 2-storey buildings. Single storey in a sort of orangey red sort of colour, and the blue is 2-storey buildings. Adjacent to site boundaries, as you can see, are 2 stories. So in summary, in terms of the development proposal, we have 10 commercial units on the designated employment site within the and 1 dwelling house adjacent to the existing houses, which falls outside the designation. And the building heights are from 1 and 2 stories. The site layout would accommodate new buildings around the existing buildings with an altered site access to accommodate the new house. The proposed uses are considered acceptable and in accordance with development policies. Moving on to the specific matters. So the proposed layout would maintain access from Holyport Road, with it being situated more to the south to accommodate the new house. The internal road network within the site is considered acceptable by highway officers, which is detailed further in the next slide. In terms of scale, as shown in the building heights plan, it would be 1 and 2 stories and set back sufficiently from the site boundaries, reflecting the form of development. And the proposed building heights are considered contextual and reflective of the form of development in the surrounding area, and the modest introduction of the 1 and 2 story buildings in the identified locations centered around the existing buildings would not dominate long distance views from the surrounding areas. And the level of development would ensure that a strong sense of openness and appropriate gaps are retained with sufficient areas of planting across the site. The access, again, this is discussed in the next slide further and is considered acceptable. In terms of the amenity impact, without individual details of the proposed buildings, which do not form part of an outline proposal, which would not be expected at this stage, it's fully understood that there will be concerns raised by third parties with regard to the potential impacts upon existing properties in terms of amenity. Officers consider that the proposed development has been designed sensitively with appropriate setbacks and heights to ensure that the neighbouring amenities are not impacted, and conditions are recommended to be imposed at this stage to ensure any windows facing the rear boundary are fixed shut and obscure glazed, fitted with obscure glazing to safeguard the properties from perceived overlooking and loss of privacy. In terms of highways, as mentioned, the access would be maintained from Holyport Road with adequate visibility displays. The Council's Highway Authority have assessed the transport assessment and are satisfied that the assessment are robust and trip generation would not lead to severe highway safety concerns or impact pedestrian or vehicle movement on the highway network. The access retained from Holyport Road and alterations to this are acceptable and could be carried out under Section 278 agreement under the Highways Act. The shared access into the site for the new dwelling and the adjacent dwelling would be appropriate in siting, and highway officers have raised no objections to this. Given the forward visibility of internal roads of the site, this creates a traffic calming situation. Ramped access to the bend within the internal roads would also help slow down vehicles as they travel through this bend. And Hendon's Way would remain closed as existing. In terms of parking standards, for the new dwelling, it would meet the 2-space standards for the residential use, and there are no specific standards for proposed E-class uses, as this was introduced after the publication of the parking strategy. Highway officers, however, then apply B1 and B7 uses as an appropriate comparison, and 1 space per 35 square meters would be applied, which means 90 spaces, and the scheme provides 75 spaces, which is considered acceptable. Here we have trees and landscaping. So several trees within the site along the boundaries have been removed. Southern boundary trees have been pruned, which overhang the site, which you can see in the first image. And the trees are not subject to TPO. Officers note that on site the trees were generally immature, evergreen trees, and we seek to suitably mitigate the loss and enhance the quality of tree stock. This would be secured via landscaping reserve matters applications. So that would be as part of the reserve matters. So we could see in the next to the parking where the stumps are sort of left, and you can see how immature they were, and in the second image here as well. Flood risk, according to the Environment Agency, risk of flooding on the 2 maps here. So we've got the first one, flood risk map for planning, which shows that in terms of surface water, the application has the lowest risk possible in terms of flooding. The second map extract is from the surface water flood risk map, whilst it shows that there is a small section of the site to the south that is at low risk of surface water flooding. Therefore, a sequential test was required, and given that the site is affected by surface water flooding, and as shown in the map, and this was set out in the submitted sequential test by the applicant, the report adequately addresses and demonstrates that the sequential test has been passed. Having reviewed the list of sites previously agreed with the local planning authority, it can be concluded that there are no reasonable available sites within the wider borough for the proposed development, which are sequentially preferable from a flood risk perspective. And then the site progressed to an exceptions test, where it has demonstrated that both limbs of the exception test have been passed, and this is outlined in the report. In summary, the residential and commercial use is considered suitable for the site, location and site constraints. 2, protection of trees is secured through the planning conditions recommended, and additional tree planting will be secured via reserve matters. There is no plot policy conflict identified, and that is of a significant and demonstrable nature. In terms of the infrastructure delivery, carbon offsetting contributions at reserve matter stage should the development not be net zero carbon, and a travel plan as well that would form part of the Section 106. The relevant highway work shall be delivered through the Section 278 agreement, which would provide bus shelters and real-time information screens on the nearest 2 bus stops on Holyport Road, alterations of existing access fronting Holyport Road, and provide double yellow lines within the surrounding adopted highway network, and maintain visibility displays to the main site access fronting Holyport Road would also be form part of this. So here we have a slide just showing the harms and benefits of the scheme. So in terms of harms, loss of trees and increased vehicle movement, but in terms of benefit, you've got new employment space, residential dwelling, efficient use of the plot in a sustainable location, and the economic uplift during construction, replanting trees and landscaping, and sill liability, and the improvements to the highway infrastructure. So just going back to the tilted balance, this just outlines what we've discussed earlier in terms of the scheme, whether it's outweighed by harms that are both of a significant and demonstrable nature. Whilst there's a modest addition of a new dwelling, which is one house as a windfall development, there would be some benefits to the benefits of this. When weighing these benefits against the impacts of the development, officers conclude that these impacts do not outweigh the benefits. The commercial use would enhance the designated employment site, therefore planning permission is recommended for approval. And here we have the final slide in terms of granting the outline permission. And this concludes our presentation. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Mohammed. Before we do questions, we've got some speakers on this one. So if I can bring forward Andrew Cormie first to speak. And when you're ready, if you press the right button, and you will have 3 minutes. I think I just need Mohammed to take the slide off.
The existing building layout. To achieve planning permission, buildings were positioned away from the Springfield Park and Hendon's Way boundaries. The new proposal encroaches on neighbours' boundaries, causing severe effect on residents' amenity, and contravenes the Borough Local Plan 613 Policy QP3, which states in summary, new development will be expected to contribute towards achieving sustainable high quality design, etc., and will be acceptable where it achieves the following design principles, and of these, item M requires no unacceptable effect on the amenities enjoyed by the occupants of adjoining properties in terms of privacy, light, disturbance, vibration, pollution, dust, smell, and access to sunlight and daylight. The position of the new buildings and the disturbance by operational vehicles and people attending these buildings would undoubtedly contravene this local plan requirement by imposing a very severe loss of amenity on all adjoining properties. For example, Springfield Park will have a high building erected parallel to and near to the adjacent property boundary, causing severe loss of light. Associated operational works would impose noise and traffic pollution, plus lack of privacy on these residents. Already, an owner finds their life ruined due to their house being unsaleable due to this application. Your paragraphs 10, 34 and 35 in your report claim no bad effects, but only consider one house. Hendon's Way, new buildings in half gardens bought by the applicant. Some will be at the foot of their garden, one with a building on each side, two with a building on one side, and also new vehicular movement and associated noise and pollution in proximity to their boundaries. Your paragraph 1036 in your report is completely inadequate. The Borough Local Plan Policy QP3A paragraph 1 is contravened, as this development would absolutely not maintain and reinforce or reflect the character of the residential area. We consider that had the entire building content of Tectonic Place, as now extended by the current proposal, been originally proposed in the past, permission would not have been granted and therefore must not be granted now. The applicant stated regarding the house on Holyport Road is to provide a continuous residential frontage for the street scene, whilst ensuring that the commercial buildings to the rear are hidden from the principal view of the site as they would otherwise appear incongruous within a predominantly residential area. This ignores the most important fact, being that the applicant is imposing the commercial buildings to the rear upon the predominantly residential area of Springfield Park and Hendon's Way. In anticipation of obtaining approval for this application, the applicant cut down mature trees, removing habitat for birds, etc. This was all before your summary of trees are cut down. The approximate doubling of the premises means a doubling of vehicular traffic and associated pollution. We know that there was a Holyport Road accident where 2 cars collided, both written off and 1 person hospitalised. This occurred just 2 houses from the entry to Tectonic Place.
Mr. Cormier, are you nearly there? Because your time is actually up. So if you could wrap it up.
Oh.
Your time is up.
Oh.
So if you could wrap it up, and then that would be.
Well.
Thank you.
The final thing was the application should be refused and permanently rejected.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. We have another speaker, Councillor Derek Wilson. He's online. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, good evening, Chairman, fellow councillors at the borough. I'm actually representing Bray Parish Council, and the fact is that the Bray Parish Council Planning Committee recommended that this should actually be refused. And the reasons why we were proposing that was the fact that the density of the buildings is too great, and the new 2-storey elements would actually dominate the boundary and cause overlooking on neighbours' properties. As we've already heard from Mr. Cormier this evening, the developer, applicant, whoever, has already cut down quite a large amount of tree coverage along the boundary, and therefore I would say that he is going against the biodiversity policy that councils have to follow. Also, we heard this evening that there is insufficient parking, and we were told, well, it's adequate at providing 75 car parking spaces when there should be 90. Now, we've got 10 units that are being proposed here. Are we actually saying that there's only going to be about 7 people working in these units, in each of these units moving forward? I don't think so. The other issue that has been highlighted by a planning officer is the double yellow lines along the actual residential roads. That is going to cause some problems with local residents who often have to park outside onto either Holyport Road or into Hendon Way. I'm pleased that the Hendon Way access is being blocked, but I think it should be a formal planning condition to ensure that it is never opened up, because it is a residential area. As we've seen from the aerial photograph, it is surrounded by a lot of residential properties. It's not actually on an industrial type area where other business parks are, where they've been converted into housing. This is an area that should have been converted into housing and in order to justify the development. But at the moment, those are our concerns, and obviously the concerns about the
1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. Is about the surface water drainage that needs to be resolved, and the local lead flood officer didn't really get to satisfactory comments from the applicant. So those are the reasons for objection. So that is the reason that I'm speaking here this evening on behalf of Bray Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And the final speaker on this one is James Griffiths. Thank you. When you're ready, if you press the right button, you have 3 minutes.
My name is James Griffiths from Sorbonne Estates, speaking in favour of the scheme. In order to secure the longer-term commercial viability of running this business park, identified as an employment site in the local plan, we're seeking a limited amount of additional commercial space together with a single residential dwelling. By supplementing the existing accommodation with new high-quality employment floor space, we are able to create a more flexible and attractive commercial area to respond to modern, more locally based business needs. Careful consideration has been given to the siting of the proposed new commercial units within the context of the existing park. In particular, the proposed storey height has been selected to ensure that impact is minimised on any adjacent residential properties. And a submitted cross-section demonstrates the proposed ridge height of the largest building to be similar to the existing houses. In addition, the commercial buildings considered closest to the boundaries have been designed to be single aspect to ensure that there's no overlooking of the rear gardens of existing houses. All the new buildings will be designed to accord with local plan policy in relation to renewable energy and sustainability, and they've been orientated to maximise the use of passive solar gain. 15 parking spaces will be provided with EV charging points. A single two-storey, four-bedroom residential dwelling has been sited at the front of the development outside the local plan employment area. The dwelling is proposed to provide a continuous residential frontage to the street scene. Occupation of this residential dwelling also provides a level of security for the remainder of the business park to the rear, which will generally be unoccupied in the evenings. The proposal contains an hours of operation condition for the commercial units, which will minimise evening and weekend disturbance to existing residents. There's also a condition requiring obscured glazing to any windows that face rear residential gardens, should overlooking be considered a particular amenity issue. Finally, there is a condition which prevents the use of land retained by the company as a through access to Hendon's Way, which was of concern to residents. The local plan acknowledges that new or replacement employment floor space can be largely met through intensification and redevelopment, leading to more efficient use of existing employment sites. The proposed flexible nature of the additional units provided in this location will therefore offer substantial benefits both for the local community as well as meeting the need of the local plan policy to protect and enhance existing business spaces. I would therefore be grateful if your committee could give due consideration to the proposals and support our application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. So I can open this up to the floor now. Does anyone have any specific questions for the officers on this application to start with? Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. A question about condition 22, which refers to the rear site boundary. Do we take it that that is the same as what the speakers just said, which is any glazing which faces onto the rear of any residential dwelling? Is that what rear of the site boundary means in this context?
I can confirm that's the case. It's the rear elevation, sorry, rear boundary facing the residential properties.
Okay, just the one. Is there going to be any restrictions as far as the light industrial units that's going to be allowed here? It says light industrial units slash business.
I haven't. You want to pick that one up?
Also saying, yeah. So basically, anything under use class E, we're restricting it to that. So anything that falls under there, so it'd be light industrial and business use.
Could you elaborate on this? Light industrial units. What sort of industry?
And that's not been specified.
Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you. Just a question on condition 5, hours of trading. If the use of the buildings has not been specified, my query on the, 8 till 6 weekdays is pretty standard. 9 till 5 on a Saturday. Could that be looked at dependent on what the units are going to be used for? Because I'm conscious that with it being in the middle of a residential area, if it's going to be trucks delivering and a lot of, that's quite a long time on a Saturday in the middle of a residential area. But I do appreciate obviously that there's no Sundays or no bank holidays or public holidays, which is good. But I'd like some clarification around the Saturday hours and if they are open for movement at all.
Short term, did you say, Councillor Taylor? Yeah. Did you want to answer that or?
Thank you, Chair. Those are the hours they've applied for. So those are the hours we have to consider tonight. I would point out that the site is a designated employment site and also that Class E, the uses within Class E are considered appropriate uses in residential areas. That's the purpose of Class E is that. So when it's light industrial, it would be like uses that don't have an impact or have a negligible impact on residential amenity. So it's not B2 manufacturing or you know, full industrial uses. It might be making, you know, UPVC window frames, things like that.
Councillor Waters?
Chairman, if I was living in Hender's Way, which is very close to this site, which originally started off as a sort of, you know, fairly inoffensive builder's yard, and now is being transformed to a sort of light industrial estate with much larger buildings, about doubling the size of square feet, with all the traffic movement in and out there day and night. I would be worried, and particularly the people. This is a mainly residential area. Therefore, to intensify light industrial use right in the middle of that, I think is very, very sad. The preliminary to all this has been the applicant, I believe it's the applicant, has been tearing down the trees like there's no tomorrow, removing all the cover that people had, and now they're exposed to this possible application. And I'd like to hear what the others people say if they were living, as I say, in nearby residential houses. And there are, well, it's surrounded by Springfield Park and Hender's Way. I think it's just unfair, let's just use that word for a moment, to double the size of this thing and within the class E. Frankly, it would be better to have residential accommodation there. If they're really worried about the 4.7 houses, there could be no better place than have houses here, not just one, but have 27 or something, or whatever the number would fit in there nicely. I just leave it open to the debate of the rest of the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. No, you're okay. Yeah.
I do understand what you're saying, Councillor Waters, but this is a designated employment site and has been identified in the local plan as such. So the proposed use is complied with the policies of the local plan.
Okay, how does that work with one house when you've just got the one dwelling in there, even though it's labelled for employment use? But
again, it's a bit of a planning balance, but it's quite appropriate to put a residential property in the street context. So it's a little bit of a balance. It is an employment site, but saying that, you know, this is where judgment call comes in, and given that it continues that residential frontage, it's considered to be appropriate under these circumstances.
thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise right now. I clearly have not researched this little bit as much as I should have, so I'm going to ask maybe what might be a stupid question. Given the history on this site of refusal for 28 flats, numerous times it looks like, or change of use for 28 flats, and given the comments by various people regarding that this site should be better off for housing, has this application that we're looking at now come through as a result of it is an employment site, and therefore you can see where I'm going with this question? Maybe I'm not articulating myself well enough.
Do you want to come in?
Yes, so your planning histories on the site relate to what we call Class MA applications. So basically, converting office industrial uses to residential, and that's through a very specific part of permitted development rights. What drives an applicant in any case, to be perfectly frank, to submit an application is solely down to them, and I don't speculate what that is. But obviously the council have got an Article 4 direction now out on this land, so it removes the requirement or ability to do permitted development rights, so it would have to come through as a planning application. But obviously, notwithstanding why they've done it or what's gone on in the past, it's an allocated employment site, so the starting point will always be employment uses. Then obviously there are policies that step out from that, but that's a policy we have to demonstrate marketing evidence and so forth. So there's a process to go through that to say, well, cascade almost to a residential use. But I mean, I'll always take members back to, you're here to assess what's been put before you. There'll always be alternatives. There'll always be other schemes that could come forward, but you've got an employment, well, predominantly employment application before you on an employment site, and obviously that's what you've got to assess. But the driving factors behind why they submitted the application, I wouldn't want to speculate, to be honest with you.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Taylor? Are you happy with that? Okay. Good, all good. Councillor Reeves, please.
Thanks. One thing I did hear, which I think is a good thing to hear, is that a sequential test was actually undertaken and completed on this site and also passed. And to actually have a developer that understands the considerations of the challenges that we have around this borough in regard to flood and surface water, I think is some way commendable compared to some of the previous ones we've had through, where those applications did not consider or complete a sequential test, even though it was told that it was necessary to do so. I won't mention the application. We all know which application that was, where we talked about them not producing a sequential test. So first of all, that's a good thing to do. I do want to please ask officers to, like, in some instances, like, it feels a little bit like sometimes when we get these reports that it's like reading like an estate agent's way of describing things. To report a modest contribution towards the housing target by adding one dwelling is not modest, it's almost negligible. And I'd just like for us to be not complicit in the way that we actually describe things in over supporting things with our description. Modest is not, in my view, an appropriate description for what this is offering to actually change our land supply, our housing supply. You know, we've had it increased up to over 1,400 houses. So if you actually extrapolate one house as a percentage against that, that's not modest contribution. So if we can please be conscious of how we describe things in the reports, then that helps us as well to give the appropriate weighting towards things. I can see how this is a commercial property at the moment. I can see how they're trying to make better and increase the use of it. And also take into mind that they have put obscure glass on those areas that are facing the residential area. And if I remember, it's 2 stories, and the houses across there are also 2 stories as well. So it doesn't seem to, for me, come across as being overtly higher in scale to the surrounding properties. But I am conscious just of the close proximity to Applecroft and the houses on Springfield, and I haven't heard the distance between the new 2-story buildings and those properties such as Applecroft and the ones on Springfield. Could you please clarify that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's about just over 6 meters between Applecroft and the new 2-story building.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's obviously some harm, maybe you could call it modest harm, to the neighbouring residential properties, but if I may respectfully disagree with my colleague Councillor Walters, who's both older and wiser than me, but nonetheless, I do think that the idea that having a business area or employment zone is a harm to the entire residential area isn't right. Actually, we need employment zones and we need business areas, and they're a benefit in general to not a harm to the surrounding residential areas. It's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Hill?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've given this one a lot of thought, and I sort of cut to the chase. I've read through the planning history, and there's been a few attempts to try and convert this to residential, albeit flats, but that's probably all that realistically works on this site. So the applicant is back trying to improve the site with more business use, which is probably the only logical alternative. I don't think it's overbearing on the existing dwellings. Looking at the size of the back gardens, there's one that's quite close, but other than that, all the other houses seem a reasonable distance apart and away, and the officers make that point in the planning document. So I think it's a good use of the site. So I'm going to move the officer recommendation to approve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Gersting, please.
Yeah, just having a look at this application. I mean, it's just now there are some firms money. And so you have to go to three finals before, but effectively the way I see it's this business is much more high, being refreshed, probably need it in a long time.
A lot of the employment and sort of these industrial sort of commercial sites we've got around the town there, they are coming to the end of their life. We've lost Clyde House, Waldeck House, and a number of others are coming to the end of their life. We need employment space. We've got a huge number of houses being built around the area, Holyport, Bray, and people need places to work. It's not going to go into housing, although there is one unit being provided. So yeah, I'm minded to support Councillor Hill with the officer's recommendation on this one. I don't think there's much really we can object to it on. Thank you.
Can I go to Councillor Waters, please?
Thank you. It is difficult, this one. It's just when it's all very well talking about it, you know, here looking at the plans and so on. But there are people who saw all the trees come down. And that's on a vast scale there, back there. And particularly people in Springfield Park will be right up against the new buildings. With all that traffic going through back and forward, lorries and so on. I just wouldn't want to live there. I'm just trying to there are planning policies we've got in our local plan which prevent those sort of things happening. QP3, you know, you could do it, but Sunrise has no unacceptable effect on the amenities enjoyed by the occupants of adjoining properties in terms of privacy, light, disturbance, vibration, pollution, dust, smell, and excess sunlight. All those things that will be suffered by these people who live on the existing estates. Now, wouldn't it be nice if the developer thought of putting just a terrace of houses along the front there, you know, and on a small scale? There's a lot more money in this, I understand that, in building a sort of light industrial, but right in the middle, what is, after all, a residential area. And the local people are absolutely sick of hearing about this. I heard a recording, somebody on the estate who was absolutely so fearful of this happening. You know, he really spoke from the heart, saying, he didn't want, to be living next to a light industrial estate, not quite knowing what the noise will be and the light will be and all that. And so I do ask the panel to hesitate. If we could have a decent little housing development there, it'd be so much better. Everybody would be happy. But nobody's going to be happy around here if this happens. So I'm told. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a difficult one, this one. It's not really that clear cut, unfortunately. Whilst I'm pleased to see an application come forward where an employment site is being kept as an employment site, it does worry me the scale of the transformation, the size it's going to grow to. It is worrying for me in a residential area. However, reading through the conditions, a lot of them are quite tight. I'm pleased to hear that windows will be obscured that face the residents. I do worry about people's enjoyment of their gardens with this scale of development on there. But noise-wise, I don't think it's going to be that bad because of the use that the development is going to be limited to. If people are minded to approve, and I'm aware that Councillor Hill has put down that recommendation and Councillor Singh has seconded, I would like to ask a couple of changes or tweaks to a few of the conditions if the councillors that have put the motion down approve. I would like to see an amendment made to the hours of trading in condition 5 on a Saturday 9 till 5. I would like that changed, if possible, to align with the hours that are in the construction environmental management plan, which 8 till 1 on a Saturday, which is in alignment to building codes as well. I'd like that changed so it all lines up with the same hours. And there was another one, and now because I'm scrolling, I've lost my place, so just bear with me a second. Oh, the other one was in regards to comments that have been made about putting a condition to block any future access from Hendrons. I would very much like that put in if the panel are minded to approve this, to make sure that that never happens, because I don't believe that would be constructive in any way, shape or form, and I don't think it's acceptable in the location for there to be, what's the word? A chance that in the future that might happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hill, since you proposed this, what are your views on Helen's additions? Helen's asked for some modifications on your proposal. So,
I mean, can we do that? Isn't that a restraint trade?
Have I missed it? So it is.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Singh said that he's minded to support this, or did he second Councillor Hill's?
Then he did second it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, because I was about to second
Yeah,
the
yeah.
motion otherwise.
No,
Thank you.
that's fine. Thank you. Thank you both. Councillor Walters, finally.
On the plan, there's an area coloured blue, which is the division on Hendon's Way. There is a condition, I'd like it reinforced by saying that will never be used in perpetuity. There will be no right of access, because that would be particularly damaging to those people who live in Hendon's Way. It is on the plan, if you put it up on the screen, but it shows on the.
Can't do that, that's going to be too onerous. Wait.
It says.
Sorry?
I'll just bring James in on that
Thank
one.
you.
Thank you.
So whenever we write a condition, we want to sort of link it to the development. It's going to be proportionate to the development. So requiring an access to be essentially stopped up, not used in perpetuity, would put a restriction on that access in perpetuity, as you say. So it wouldn't be tied to just the impact that would come out from the development. So condition 23, which is set out in your reports, obviously links the shall not provide vehicular or pedestrian access on the private road situated between numbers 13 and 14 Hendon Way, and shall be retained for the lifetime of the development. And the reason why it's tied to the lifetime of the development is that that's where your harm would come from. So obviously, if that ever ceases or changes, then that condition would then not have effect. Then we'd look at another condition if different development came forward. So that's why it's been phrased that way and why we can't do in perpetuity.
I couldn't hear any of that. Sorry. You can't put it in perpetuity.
For the lifetime of the development.
Yeah, I know, that's what it's got here, but I like it in either perpetuity or a legal agreement to say what it says here. That's what can happen. It's very important, that thing. We know it's all very well at this stage, but in 2 or 3 years from now, it'll be another matter.
Hopefully you can hear me, Councillor Walters now. Yes, I was just saying that you have to tie the duration of the condition to where the impacts come from. And in this case, it's the development itself. So that's why we can't have it in perpetuity, because other things could happen onto the site. Like, you've been speculating about a future house development coming forward. Well, we can't just secure that for forever, basically. It has to be tied to the lifetime of the development, because that's where your impacts come from. It wouldn't meet the test for conditions going beyond that, unfortunately.
Okay, well, how long is the lifetime of the development? How long is that?
Councillor.
Yeah, I mean.
Councillor Gerge saying, did you want to speak still, or should we just go to the vote?
Let's go to the vote.
So we've got a motion on the table proposed to go for officer recommendation proposed by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Gerge Singh. And if I can hand over to Kim.
Yes, thank you. Is that with the condition as well that Councillor Taylor mentioned?
Together.
Yes, if you could, with the full motion, if possible.
Yep, so not to put you out of a job, Kim, but the motion, I understand it is to be is approved subject to the conditions set out in section 13 of the report, with condition 5 amended to read as: the commercial use shall only be open for trading and other related purposes between the hours of 8 and 6 on weekdays and 8 and 1 on Saturdays, and at no other time on Sundays or bank or public holidays, unless any variation has been agreed in writing with the local planning authority. The reason being to safeguard the amenities of residential properties in the immediate area.
Happy with that before we go to vote?
Just a bit worried about restraining business on a Saturday.
It's not retail business.
I know it's not retail business. It's
mean,
like industrial business, isn't it?
It's your motion, Jeff. I mean.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's put it in. They can always apply for a change, can't they?
Councillor Singh, did you want to add something quickly?
I'm just finding mindful of this.
I know Councillor Taylor was talking about the construction management plan. I mean, that plan is 8 till 1 for, obviously, for construction because construction is noisy. And obviously there's legislation in place to protect people. But when you're looking at restricting the hours down to 8 to 1, obviously this is a commercial development, it's got to be viable. If you've got people sitting in offices working on a Saturday afternoon and, you know, they've got to go home, I mean, you know, we could say non-noisy, but it will, I think it'll restrict the quality of tenant. You know, that's my only concern with that. But it's open to you. I would say leave it as it is. I mean,
Councillor Taylor, can I just bring you back in?
Sorry, yeah, I was
I
just
know
going to
you've got
say
it's
that
in reference to that though.
they're nearly doubling the size of the site for viability, so surely the residents can have a bit of enjoyment in their gardens on a Saturday afternoon, on reflection. Respectfully, thank you.
Councillor Waters, please. Sorry, I can hardly hear you. Yeah. That was the one that James just described to explain, the perpetuity question. I'm struggling to hear you actually, but.
Yeah, that's what is the lifetime of the?
What's the lifetime, that's it.
Well, the lifetime of the development is however long the lifetime continues for. It could be a year, it could be 100 years, it could be forever. So, but the point with the condition is that it's tied to the duration of that development. So if it goes on in perpetuity, that condition would have effects in perpetuity. If it goes on for a year and the use ceases, then that condition would cease to have effect then. So who knows how long the lifetime of the development would be.
No. That's very important, those people who live there, okay? They don't want lorries going backwards and forwards day and night past their houses. That's the point of keeping that blue land free from traffic in perpetuity. I'm sure a legal agreement could be drawn up to, assure that happens.
Can I just get Catriona just give some advice in terms of the tests for legal agreements? That'd be helpful, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is in the middle of the residential area. Obviously, it is in the borough local plan. There's a light industrial unit site. It is on. Oh, yeah, okay. It is in middle of the residential area. It is in the borough local plan. It is a light industrial unit site. I agree with Councillor Taylor. There should be some sort of, we don't know what sort of industry going to be there, whether it's going to be noisy or what.
Yes.
Obviously, it's going to affect the near residential properties. So I think we need to really think of the conditions of working hours.
And then we can run through. Yeah, Catriona.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to Councillor Walters' concern, there's a condition dealing with the private road. You should not overlap a condition with a planning obligation, planning agreement. There's no need for planning agreement here because the condition determines the control of the development is within the site, and that condition is sufficient and it's enforceable. To go to perpetuity on that condition would not be a lawful condition. It would be unenforceable, and it wouldn't be legally appropriate. It wouldn't be legal. In other words, sorry, that condition is fine as far as it goes. There is no legal need to go beyond the wording in that condition. I hope that helps.
The applicant could legally, voluntarily do that, though, couldn't he?
Do what? Sorry, Councillor Walters.
Agree never to use that for.
Councillor Walters, there's no need for the applicant to agree anything that is a condition that's going to be applied, and it's a criminal offence to fail to comply with a breach of condition notice. So from an enforcement point of view, if you're thinking about how robust that condition is, if there's a breach of condition notice can be served on the occupier and the person having control of the occupiers. And if that breach of condition notice isn't adhered to, that's a criminal offence. So that's a prosecution
Yeah, I understand
in the public interest.
It's the duration of the prohibition.
Yes. The duration is, as James has explained, for the lifetime of the development, which is defined. It's self-explanatory definition because it goes to the length of time that that site's going to be used for the purpose outlined in the application. So that is clearly tying the condition to the use that's proposed in this application.
That could be a year.
No, lifetime.
Well, he said it, the officer said it.
We don't know how long it will be, Councillor Walters.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
So there's no risk there because the condition's there for as long as that the use continues as applied for. I don't know if there's any other way I can explain that, and I think James has already covered the point. So I think we need to move on, Chair, through you. Thank you.
Let's go to vote.
What topic read, Louise? No. Are we ready to go to the vote? Have we established the hours? Are we happy with the hours of the Saturday? You know, did you want to read that bit out again at least, you know? Because there's various suggestions on that one.
Yeah, so condition 5 is proposed to be amended to the commercial use shall only be open for trading and other related purposes between the hours of 8 and 6 on weekdays and 8 to 1 on Saturdays, and at no other time on Sundays or bank or public holidays unless any variation has been agreed in writing with the local planning authority.
Happy with that, Councillor Hill? Yeah. Okay, we're ready to go to a name vote then.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a motion proposed by Councillor Hill and seconded by Councillor Singh to grant planning permission in line with officer recommendation and with Councillor Taylor's amendments to condition 5. I'll now go to a named vote. Councillor Bra.
Abstain.
Councillor Douglas.
For.
Councillor Hill. Councillor Martin. Councillor Reeves.
For.
Councillor Kashmir Singh.
For.
Councillor Gertsch Singh.
For.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Walters.
Against. No.
That's 7 for, 1 against, 1 abstention. The motion is carried. Sorry, Chair, can I also go to a vote on whether we continue the meeting as we've gone beyond the, yes,
please.
absolutely.
Councillor Hills was leaving at this point anyway, so he's free to go. But yes,
Shall we
the
just
next
pull
part.
through? Pull through? Yeah, there's a pull through. Come on.
What?
Let's just pull through and do the next one.
Oh, we don't anymore, do we?
Put it to the 27th, apparently.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I now need to ask councillors whether they're happy for us to continue the meeting tonight. Please let me know if you're for or against continuing. Councillor Bra. Councillor Douglas. Councillor Martin. Councillor Reeves. Councillor Kashmir Singh.
Yes.
Councillor Gertsch Singh. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Walters. That's 3 for, 5 against, The motion is, the motion to continue the meeting falls, which means that we'll have to stop now and conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Excuse me, before we conclude, we're proposing that the 26th, where we originally had an extraordinary meeting, would be a good diary entry for hearing them, the Kimbers Lane. Yeah. No, it'd be an extraordinary. We originally had extraordinary for Spencer's Farm, I think it was, yeah, Spencer's Farm. So now so we had that in the diary originally, so it'd be just one item as an extraordinary.
Yeah, Spencer's
Yeah.
Farm,
Yeah.
needs something extra on it, so that's been pulled.